Hey there, tonight we're diving into the brutal rituals of the ancient Carthaginians. What you're about to discover might just make you glad you live in the age of Netflix and chill instead of fire and sacrifice. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. Carthage. Just the name alone suggests a place teetering on the edge of myth and reality, nestled on the shimmering shores of North Africa like a jewel with a dark underbelly. You're strolling through its bustling streets, where the air is thick with the scent of spices and the chatter of an empire at its peak. It's easy to get caught up in the romance of it all, but we're here to dig deeper. You're about to find out what's behind those legends of child sacrifice. Were the Carthaginians truly the baby-burning pagans the Romans painted them to be, or is there more to this story? Let's start with the Tafet of Salambo, a site that's as much about bone-chilling intrigue as it is about archaeological fascination. This ancient burial ground has gifted modern historians with more than just a few sleepless nights. Picture this, rows upon rows of small urns, each containing the cremated remains of young children and animals. Now, before you jump to conclusions, let's consider the sources. Much of what we know comes from the Romans, those master propagandists who could sell ice to an Eskimo. They had a vested interest in demonizing Carthage, their formidable rival across the Mediterranean. And what better way to drum up support for their wars than by painting the Carthaginians as monstrous child murderers? But let's not give Carthage a free pass just yet. We've got to consider the archaeological evidence. Some historians argue these sacrifices were indeed a grim reality, a religious rite performed to appease Baal Hammon, the chief god of Carthage. The practice, known as Malk sacrifice, might have been seen as the ultimate offering, a way to ensure divine favor for the community. Inscriptions on steels found at the site sometimes mention substitutions, suggesting perhaps not all sacrifices were human. But hey, a lamb doesn't quite have the same shock factor in the annals of history, does it? Now, let's talk numbers. The Tafet is estimated to contain over 20,000 urns. 20,000. That's a staggering number, right? But it's key to remember that these urns span several centuries, from around 400 BCE to the fall of Carthage in 146 BCE. It's not like they were having a daily bonfire with the kids. And there's the rub. Was this ritual as widespread as the numbers seem to suggest? Or were these urns simply the result of a high infant mortality rate, with infants being cremated and buried as part of a funerary practice rather than ritual sacrifice? The debate rages on, not helped by the fact that the Carthaginians were less than meticulous record keepers, were left to rely on fragments of text from outsiders like Diodorus Siculus, who described the gruesome rituals with an enthusiasm that would make Stephen King blush. But remember, Diodorus was writing in the 1st century BCE, long after Carthage had been reduced to rubble and Roman glory. The man had an agenda, and while we're on the subject of propaganda, let's not forget the political chess game in play here. The Romans, ever the savvy marketers, were in the business of empire building. They needed to justify their military campaigns against Carthage, and what better way than to depict them as morally corrupt? It's a narrative as old as time. Demonize the enemy to galvanize the troops. If you think modern politics is dirty, just be glad you're not living in the ancient Mediterranean. So, what's the takeaway from all this? Well, dear listener, reality is complicated, and it doesn't fit neatly into the villainous caricatures drawn by rival civilizations. Were the Carthaginians guilty of child sacrifice? Maybe. But it's also possible that these rituals were exaggerated or misunderstood, a case of history being written by the victors with a flair for the dramatic. But let's not get too bogged down in the philosophical. Visualize yourself walking past the bustling marketplace, where the clamor of traders haggling over purple dye and olive oil mixes with the bleeding of sacrificial animals. The economy of Carthage was booming, driven by trade routes that stretched from the Iberian Peninsula to the far-off lands of Egypt. It was a city built on commerce, not just conquest. And with wealth came power, and with power, well, you know the drill. jealousy, rivalry, a little bit of backstabbing. And speaking of rivalry, enter Rome. The Punic Wars were less about noble ideals and more about cold, hard cash, or in this case, land and influence. The Romans were eyeing the fertile lands of North Africa with the same greed you might reserve for the last slice of pizza. Carthage, with its strategic ports and military prowess, was standing squarely in the way of Roman expansion. Cue the war drums and the inevitable clash of civilizations. But back to the Tafet. It's a site that continues to challenge our understanding of Carthaginian society. Was it a place of religious significance, or a convenient scapegoat for Roman propaganda? Modern scholars are still picking through the ashes, figuratively and literally, to piece together the truth. And while we may never have a definitive answer, the mystery itself is a testament to the complexity of ancient societies, so often reduced to simplistic narratives. As you wander the ancient ruins, remember that history is rarely black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of events and motives, where heroes and villains often wear the same face. So, next time you hear about the barbaric rituals of the Carthaginians, take it with a grain of salt, or perhaps a whole salt mine, considering Carthage's notorious reputation for salting the earth. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's leave the Tafet behind and continue our journey through the vibrant, if occasionally blood-stained, tapestry of Carthaginian history. Ah, Carthage, where the economy was as vibrant and complex as the swirling patterns on a Phoenician vase. Let's leave the dust and ashes of the Tafet behind for a moment and take a stroll down to the bustling docks. Here, the true backbone of Carthage's power is on full display. Picture ships as far as the eye can see, laden with goods that would make any ancient trader's heart skip a beat. Glistening metals, aromatic spices, and the highly coveted Tyrian purple dye that was worth its weight in gold, or at least as much as a Roman senator's toga. The Carthaginians were masters of maritime trade, thanks to their geographical position in the Mediterranean, which was as strategic as it was profitable. Imagine the ancient equivalent of a prime real estate location, but with much more potential for sea battles. Their trade routes formed the infamous Phoenician Triangle, a maritime network stretching from the Iberian Peninsula to the Levant, with Carthage as its beating heart. This setup wasn't just about moving goods, it was about moving power and influence across the seas, much like how social media influencers do today, only with less controversy over sponsored content. This bustling trade brought Carthage staggering wealth. By the time Hannibal was crossing the Alps with his war elephants, Carthage was already sitting on a treasure trove that could make even Scrooge McDuck envious. But with great wealth came great expectations, namely, keeping the guards happy. The Carthaginians believed their prosperity was tied to divine favor, and they went to extreme lengths to secure it, and to the brutal rituals. This wasn't just about religion. It was about economics and social pressure, wrapped in a bloody, let's talk numbers. Carthage's economy was so robust that during its peak, the city was home to about 400,000 people. Think about it. A city bustling with traders, artisans, and yes, even a few ambitious politicians ready to stab each other in the back, metaphorically speaking. And at the center of it all were the rituals that were thought to keep the economic wheels greased. The sacrificial rites, whether exaggerated or not, were part of a complex societal structure where wealth, religion, and power were intertwined tighter than a Roman senator's belt after a banquet. But let's not get too carried away with the romantic notion of ritual sacrifice as a purely religious act. Economic pressures played a significant role here. When crops failed or trade routes were threatened, the Carthaginians believed that the gods required appeasement in the form of sacrifices. It was a grim insurance policy for the city's prosperity, a practice that seems barbaric now, but was rooted in the harsh realities of ancient life, where a good harvest could mean the difference between feasting and famine. The Carthaginians' reliance on trade was both their greatest strength and their Achilles' heel. Their wealth attracted envy like bees to honey, particularly from their neighbors across the water. The Romans, with their ever-expanding empire, saw Carthage as a threat that needed to be neutralized. And let's face it, nothing justifies a military campaign quite like the promise of plunder and the moral high ground of saving the world from baby-burning pagans, even if that narrative was more spun than the finest Carthaginian linen. Speaking of spin, the Carthaginians were no slouches. when it came to maintaining their image. Their mercantile acumen was legendary, and their ability to negotiate peace treaties, like the one after the First Punic War in 241 BCE, showed their savvy in diplomacy. They paid a staggering 200 talents of silver to Rome to end the conflict. Imagine coughing up that much dough just to keep the peace. It's as if they were paying off a particularly aggressive HOA, only this one had legions of soldiers at its disposal. But the peace was as fragile as a Phoenician glass vase. The Second Punic War was just around the corner, with Hannibal preparing his infamous trek across the Alps. This wasn't just a military campaign, it was an economic maneuver. Hannibal's invasion of Italy aimed to disrupt Roman trade and weaken their economy, a classic case of hitting them where it hurts, the pocketbook. The Carthaginians understood the power of wealth and trade, and they wielded it like a sword. So, as you wander through the bustling markets and hear the clamor of haggling traders, remember that Carthage was a city built on commerce. Its rituals, no matter how brutal, were a reflection of the economic and social pressures of the time. It was a place where wealth, power, and religion danced together in a complicated, often bloody, waltz. The Carthaginians were not merely victims of Roman propaganda. They were active players in the grand theater of the ancient world, with a script that included both opulent prosperity and, yes, perhaps, the shadowy spectre of sacrifice. But let's not wrap this up just yet. The stage is set for the next act in our journey through Carthaginian history, a tale of ambition, rivalry, and the relentless pursuit of power. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the political machinations and military strategies that defined Carthage's legacy, a story as rich and layered as the city itself. Now let's step behind the curtain and meet the Carthaginian puppet masters pulling the strings. This is where the political intrigue gets juicier than a ripe fig in a Phoenician market. Picture the bustling city of Carthage, where the scent of power is as thick as the aroma of incense wafting from the temples. At the heart of it all were the ruling elite and the priests, each wielding influence like a seasoned gladiator wields a sword. But don't let the religious garb fool you. These guys weren't just about chanting hymns and lighting candles. No, sir, they were masters of the political game, with a penchant for power plays that would make Machiavelli proud. Let's start with the top dogs, the Suffites. These were the Carthaginian equivalent of Roman consuls, except with a bit more flair and a lot more power. Elected annually, the Suffites were the public face of Carthage, overseeing everything from judicial matters to military campaigns. But don't be fooled into thinking this was some kind of democratic utopia. With wealth came influence, and with influence came the ability to sway decisions. The Suffites often hailed from wealthy families who had more fingers in more pies than a Roman banquet. The Maganid family, for example, was one of these influential clans, with members like Hamilcar Barca and his son Hannibal, who were as much politicians as they were military strategists. Speaking of Hannibal, let's talk about his family's role in these rituals. The Barcas were the rock stars of Carthaginian society, but with less leather and more linen. They knew how to play the political game, using religious rituals as a tool to reinforce their power. Imagine the scene. A grand procession to the Tafet, with priests and politicians marching together, each keenly aware of the spectacle's power to inspire both awe and fear. Was it piety? A little. But mostly, it was about showcasing their influence, ensuring everyone knew who was running the show in Carthage. The priests, meanwhile, were the spiritual brokers of the city. They held the keys to divine favor, which was as good as gold in a society that believed prosperity was a gift from the gods. These holy men were often drawn from the ranks of the elite, reinforcing the connection between wealth and religious authority. And they didn't just stand around in robes, looking pious. Oh no, they were the ones who sanctioned the rituals, declaring when and why a sacrifice was necessary. Was it about appeasing the gods? Sure. But it was also about keeping the populace in line, reminding them that the gods, and by extension, the priests, held the fate of Carthage in their hands. But let's not give these priests too much credit. They weren't infallible, and their decisions were often influenced by the political climate. When the city faced external threats, like the encroaching Roman forces, the pressure was on to keep the guards happy. The priest's power was both a weapon and a shield, used to maintain social order in a city that was always a step away from chaos. And they didn't do it alone. The ruling elite, including Hannibal's family, often had a hand in these decisions, ensuring that the rituals served their political ends as much as their spiritual ones. Now, here's a juicy tidbit. Some historians suggest that the Carthaginians used these rituals to consolidate power during times of crisis. Think about it. When the threat of Roman invasion loomed large, a well-timed sacrifice could rally the populace, galvanize the troops, and remind everyone who was in charge. It was a masterstroke of political theater, blending religion and politics in a way that would make even the most seasoned spin dark to blush. But let's not forget the economic context. These rituals weren't just about power, they were about survival. Carthage's economy was heavily reliant on trade, and any disruption to their routes could spell disaster. The ruling elite knew this, and they used the rituals as a form of divine insurance policy. Sacrifices were made to ensure favorable winds, bountiful harvests, and safe passage for their ships. It was a pragmatic approach to the harsh realities of ancient life, where the whims of the gods could mean the difference between prosperity and ruin. So, were these rituals about piety or power? The answer, dear listener, is a bit of both. The Carthaginian ruling elite and priests were adept at manipulating religious practices to serve their own ends, blending faith and politics in a potent mix that kept them in control. But let's not be too cynical. There was genuine belief at play here, a conviction that the gods held the key to Carthage's fortunes. It's a reminder that in the ancient world, religion was as much about power as it was about faith, a complex dance of devotion and domination. And speaking of dances, let's not forget the Roman perspective. To them, Carthaginian rituals were barbaric, a convenient narrative used to justify their military campaigns. But as we've seen, the reality was far more nuanced. A tangled web of belief, politics, and power plays that defined Carthage's legacy. As we continue our journey through Carthaginian history, keep in mind that this is just one layer of the story. There's still more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more truths to reveal. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the labyrinthine world of Carthage, where the line between legend and reality is as blurred as the horizon at sea. And so we march on to the heart of Carthaginian society, where the air is thick with incense and the whispers of history. Let's peel back the layers and discover what really made this city tick beyond the political machinations and religious spectacles. First off, let's talk about the social pyramid. At the top, you had the elite, living it up in lavish homes that boasted mosaic floors and a view of the Mediterranean that would make even a Greek god jealous. These were the folks pulling strings, with the wealth and power to make or break a summer's worth of crops. But don't be fooled into thinking they were lounging around in togas all day. Life was a constant balancing act between maintaining their status and keeping the guards appeased. Their power wasn't just in coins, but in their ability to navigate the complex social ties that kept Carthage running smoothly. Below them were the common citizens, the everyday Carthaginians who made up the backbone of society. These were the artisans, traders and farmers, the people hustling day in, day out to keep that bustling economy humming like a well-oiled Phoenician ship. Citizenship wasn't just a birthright, it was a status symbol, a badge of honor that came with both privileges and responsibilities. You were expected to contribute to the city, whether that meant paying taxes or participating in the rituals that kept divine favor on Carthage's side. Now, let's shed some light on the gender roles. Women in Carthage had a bit more wiggle room compared to their Greek or Roman counterparts. They could own property, engage in business, and some even wielded religious authority. This wasn't exactly a feminist utopia, but in a world where most women were seen and not heard, Carthaginian women had a voice that echoed through the alleys and marketplaces. They were key players in the family unit, managing households, and sometimes even overseeing the education of their children. It was a society where, if you had the right connections, gender could be less of a barrier and more of a nuanced dance. And speaking of family, let's dive into the household structure. Carthaginian families were a tight-knit bunch, bound not just by blood, but by economic necessity. Children were seen as both a blessing and an investment, future contributors to the family's wealth and stability. It was a place where the family dinner wasn't just about sharing food, but about reinforcing social bonds. This communal mindset extended beyond the home. Carthaginians saw themselves as part of a larger family, the city itself. and participated in its rituals as a testament to that bond. So, what about these infamous rituals? How did the everyday Carthaginian fit into this macabre tapestry? Well, if you were part of the common populace, these rituals were as much a public spectacle as they were a religious duty. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a blockbuster movie premiere. Everyone had a role to play, from the high priest leading the procession to the humble citizen offering prayers. The public's participation wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. These rituals were woven into the very fabric of society, a shared experience that reinforced Carthaginian identity. But let's not get too caught up in the romanticism. There was a darker side to these communal gatherings. The pressure to conform, to participate, was immense. In a city where divine favor was seen as crucial to survival, questioning the rituals wasn't just frowned upon, it was dangerous. The societal norms that made these brutal practices possible were rooted in a potent mix of fear, faith, and the desire for stability in a world that was anything but predictable. And let's not forget the old carrot and stick method. The Carthaginian elite knew how to keep the masses in line, using religion as both a motivator and a deterrent. Participate in the rituals, and you were part of the community, protected and favored. Step out of line, and you risked not just social ostracism, but the wrath of the gods themselves. It was a delicate balance of belief and coercion, a system that ensured everyone knew their place in the grand scheme of things. Now, let's peek behind the curtain of Carthaginian identity. These rituals, as gruesome as they might seem, were a reflection of the society's values. They were about more than just appeasing the gods. They were about showcasing unity, resilience, and a shared purpose. The public's role in these spectacles was both active and passive, a testament to the strength of Carthage and its people. It was a society that understood the power of collective action, where every citizen played a part in the city's destiny. And what about the outsiders looking in? To the Greeks and Romans, Carthaginian ritual seemed barbaric, a convenient narrative to justify their own ambitions. But for the Carthaginians, these practices were deeply ingrained in their culture, a manifestation of their beliefs and values. We might balk at the idea of child sacrifice, but for a society that believed in the tangible influence of the divine, these rituals were as integral to their identity as trade and politics. So, as we continue our journey through Carthaginian history, remember that the story is far from black and white. The rituals that seem so brutal to us were part of a complex social fabric, a blend of faith, power, and survival. It's a tale that challenges our perceptions and forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths of the past. And as we delve deeper into the labyrinth of Carthaginian society, keep in mind that there's always more to the story, more layers to uncover, and more myths to debunk. Stay tuned as we unravel the next chapter in this captivating saga of ambition, power, and the eternal dance with the divine. So, here we are, diving headfirst into the murky waters of Carthaginian rituals and their modern-day reflections. You might think of this as a historical CSI, where we're dusting off the past and checking for fingerprints left by both ancient and modern hands. Carthage and its notorious rituals have been both demonized and romanticized over the centuries, depending on who's holding the pen, or the sword, as it were. The Romans, masters of storytelling with a penchant for drama, set the stage for these enduring myths. For them, Carthage wasn't just an enemy. It was the boogeyman of the Mediterranean, a society painted in shades of villainy to justify Rome's own imperial ambitions. Let's break down how the Romans spun their narrative. Imagine a Roman historian, quill in hand, crafting tales that would rival a Hollywood blockbuster. The Carthaginians, with their child sacrifices and dark rites, made for the perfect antagonists. Diodorus Siculus and his ilk didn't just report history. They manufactured it, infusing it with enough horror to ensure it stuck in the public's imagination like bubblegum under a school desk. They weren't just chronicling events. They were crafting a legacy, one that presented Rome as the noble hero swooping in to save the day from these so-called barbaric practices. It's a tale as old as time. The victors write history, and they do it with a flair for the dramatic. Fast forward to modern times, and you'll find that the image of Carthage hasn't quite shaken off its Roman shackles. Hollywood, literature, and even some history books still echo these ancient tales, painting Carthage as a land of ritualistic terror. The appeal is undeniable. Who doesn't love a good story of ancient mysteries and dark deeds? But as we dig deeper, it becomes clear that these tales are more fiction than fact, more pulp fiction than peer-reviewed paper. Modern archaeology has begun to peel back the layers of this narrative, revealing a society that was complex and sophisticated, not just a one-dimensional villain. Now, let's talk numbers, because who doesn't love a good statistic to spice up a story? The infamous Tafet of Salambo, with its 20,000 urns, might initially scream baby barnfire to some. But remember, this spans several centuries. It's more like a slow burn than a raging inferno, and many historians now argue that these were more likely funerary rites rather than mass sacrifices. The Carthaginians, like many ancient societies, had a high infant mortality rate. It's a harsh reality, but one that provides a more mundane explanation for the Tafet's contents. The allure of the macabre is strong, but the truth often whispers where legends shout. So, what lessons can we draw from this bloody chapter of history? Well, first off, it's a cautionary tale about the power of narrative. The Romans understood that the pen, or the chisel on a marble tablet, was as mighty as the sword. By crafting a story of monstrous rituals, they justified their own conquests and painted themselves as the bringers of civilization. It's a reminder that history isn't just about what happened, but about who tells the story and why. The Carthaginian narrative was twisted to serve Roman ends, a lesson in propaganda that still resonates today. But let's not just point fingers at the Romans. The Carthaginians weren't innocent lambs led to the slaughter. They were savvy players in the ancient world, using religion and ritual to bolster their own power and control. The ritual served as much a political purpose as a religious one, a way to unify the populace and maintain social order. It's a reminder that faith and power often walk hand in hand, each reinforcing the other in a delicate dance of governance and belief. Now, what about the modern legacy of these rituals? In many ways, Carthage has become a symbol, a shorthand for the exotic and the enigmatic. It's been romanticized as a lost civilization, a place of wonder and mystery shrouded in the mists of time. There's a certain appeal to the idea of an ancient city with secrets to unveil, a place where history and legend intertwine. But as much as we might be drawn to the romance, it's important to keep our feet firmly planted in reality. The Carthaginians were real people, living real lives, facing real challenges. Their rituals, however brutal they might seem to us now, were a product of their time and circumstances. So, how do we reconcile the legend with the reality? The answer, dear listener, lies in embracing the complexity. Carthage wasn't just a city of sacrifice. It was a bustling hub of trade, culture, and innovation. Its rituals were part of a broader societal fabric, one that included vibrant markets, thriving trade routes, and a political landscape as intricate as a Phoenician tapestry. By acknowledging both the light and the dark, we gain a fuller picture of what Carthage truly was, not just a footnote in Roman history, but a civilization in its own right. As we wrap up our journey through the annals of Carthaginian history, take a moment to reflect on the narratives that have shaped our understanding of the past. Remember that history isn't static. It's a living, breathing entity that evolves with each new discovery and interpretation. The myths of Carthage, like all myths, contain a kernel of truth wrapped in layers of storytelling. It's up to us to peel back those layers and see the world as it was, in all its messy, complicated glory. In the end, the story of Carthaginian rituals is a testament to the power of belief, both in the divine and in the narratives we construct about ourselves and others. It's a reminder that history is never just about the past. It's about how we understand our present and envision our future. So, as you drift off to sleep with these tales of ancient Carthage swirling in your mind, remember this. Every story has two sides, and the truth is often found somewhere in between. Ah, the Byzantine Empire. If there ever was a historical entity that knew how to make an entrance, it was this one. Picture a juggernaut straddling Europe and Asia like a glamorous, if somewhat controlling, colossus. Founded in 330 AD, when Emperor Constantine decided to plop down a new Rome, Constantinople. At the crossroads of civilization, the Byzantine Empire was the original influencer. We're talking pre-Instagram, but with just as much eye-catching flair. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of why this empire was more than just a pretty face in a toga. The Byzantines weren't just about bling and divine right. They were the cultural and economic nerve center of the medieval world. Their empire acted like a supercharged Wi-Fi router, connecting Europe, Asia, and even Africa with a network of trade routes and cultural exchanges. This wasn't just a matter of geography, it was strategic brilliance. They knew how to leverage their position to the fullest, ensuring that their influence was felt far and wide, particularly in the Balkans. Speaking of the Balkans, the Byzantines left a cultural footprint there so deep you could trip over it. This region, with its patchwork quilt of peoples and traditions, found itself under the radiant, yet sometimes oppressive Byzantine sun. Byzantine culture seeped into every corner, from architecture to religion, and even dietary habits. Yes, they had a thing for olive oil and wine. The Byzantines were the original trendsetters. When they weren't busy with architecture, they were flexing their legal muscles with something called the Justinian Code. Enacted in the 6th century, this was the ultimate legal remix, taking Roman law and giving it a fresh Byzantine twist. The Justinian Code was the greatest hits album of ancient legal thought, and it resonated throughout Europe, shaping legal systems for centuries. It's like the Beatles of legal documents, only with more Latin. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of it all. The Byzantine court was notorious for its over-the-top ceremonies. Imagine a sort of medieval Oscars night, complete with golden robes, elaborate rituals, and a level of pomp that would make even the most extravagant influencers blush. And while all that glitz might have signaled power and stability, it often masked the political intrigue and backstabbing that were as Byzantine as, well, the adjective itself. Their diplomacy was a masterclass in subtle manipulation. They could talk circles around their enemies, allies and frenemies alike, often using marriages, alliances, and a little bit of gold under the table to get what they wanted. The Byzantines were the original power brokers, playing the long game while everyone else was still learning the rules. They didn't just survive, they thrived by being adaptable, much like a historical version of that one friend who always seems to know the right people and the juiciest gossip. Of course, not everything was sunshine and mosaics. The Byzantines had their dark sides. Their love of ceremony and grandeur often came with a hefty price tag, both financially and socially. Maintaining such a vast empire required not just gold, but also a heavy-handed approach at times, with military campaigns and taxation that could make life a bit less gilded for the average peasant. Yet, despite these challenges, the allure of the Byzantine Empire was undeniable. It was a place where East met West, where cultures clashed and merged, creating a melting pot that was as volatile as it was vibrant. It was a world where the Justinian Code could coexist with lavish ceremonies and diplomatic chess games, all under the watchful eyes of emperors who fancied themselves as God's representatives on earth. In the end, the Byzantine Empire was a complex tapestry woven with threads of ambition, innovation, and just a dash of extravagance. Its influence on the Balkans was profound, leaving an indelible mark that can still be seen today. Whether through the remnants of Byzantine architecture or the echoes of its legal principles, the legacy of Byzantium continues to resonate, a testament to an empire that truly knew how to leave its mark on history. Now, let's talk about how the Byzantines didn't just stop at influencing laws and architecture. They went for the soul of the Balkans. We're diving into the Byzantine Empire's religious sway, particularly their ace move. Spreading Orthodox Christianity like it was the latest fashion trend. The conversion story of the Bulgarians and Moravians is a bit like a medieval buddy movie, complete with alliances, culture clashes, and a spiritual awakening. In 864 AD, Boris I of Bulgaria decided to take the plunge into the baptismal font, setting off a chain reaction that would ripple across the region. Why did he do it? Well, think of Boris as a medieval CEO looking for a merger. Aligning with the Byzantine Empire had perks, not least of which was avoiding getting steamrolled by their military might, or worse, excommunicated. Boris saw the wisdom in cozying up to Byzantium, and who could blame him? It's like getting the VIP pass to the hardest club in town, where the bouncers carry gilded crosses. Meanwhile, over in Moravia, a year prior in 863 AD, the brothers Cyril and Methodius were on a mission straight from Constantinople. These guys were the original dynamic duo, tasked with spreading the good word, or rather, the orthodox word. They were the linguistic ninjas who developed the Glagolitic alphabet, the precursor to Cyrillic, which allowed Slavic peoples to read the Bible in their own tongue. Can you imagine the scriptural mic drop that must have been? Suddenly, the Moravians didn't just have a new religion, they had a whole new cultural identity. Now, while the Byzantines were busy baptizing the Balkans, they also had to up their architectural game. Enter the Hagia Sophia, a building so jaw-droppingly magnificent that it made the Romans clutch their pearls. Finished in 537 AD, this architectural juggernaut was the Bayonne of cathedrals. Its enormous dome seemed to float on air, held aloft by what felt like divine intervention, but was actually some pretty nifty engineering. The Hagia Sophia wasn't just a church, it was a theological flex. It screamed, "Look at me, Rome, top that." Spoiler, they couldn't, not for a long time. But the Byzantines weren't just about building impressive structures. They were about using them to cement their cultural dominance. The Hagia Sophia became the religious epicenter, a symbol of Orthodox Christianity that echoed through the Balkans, influencing everything from church designs to mosaic art. Its grandeur was a not-so-subtle reminder of the empire's spiritual and temporal power. And let's be honest, who wouldn't want to pray in a place that looked like it was painted by angels on commission? The church didn't stop at architecture, though. It was instrumental in spreading Byzantine culture through art, language, and education. Monasteries became the medieval hubs of learning, not unlike today's universities, but with more incense and fewer tuition fees. They churned out illuminated manuscripts and icons that were not just religious symbols, but pieces of Byzantine propaganda, showcasing the empire's artistic prowess. It was as if every brushstroke whispered, "We are the cultural torchbearers. The rest of you take notes." In terms of language, the Byzantine Empire was like a linguistic blender, mixing Greek with Slavic tongues to create a cultural smoothie that was as rich as it was diverse. The church pushed for Greek as the liturgical language, which, let's face it, was a savvy move. It kept the intellectual elite tethered to Constantinople, ensuring that theological and philosophical debates stayed firmly under Byzantine influence. But let's not get too caught up in the romance of it all. This cultural exchange wasn't all cumbear and choir practice. The Byzantines had a knack for using religion as a political tool, a divine carrot they dangled in front of potential allies, often with an army standing menacingly behind it. Their conversions were as much about consolidating power as they were about saving souls. It's a testament to their strategic brilliance, or cunning, depending on how you look at it. So, the next time you hear about the spread of Orthodox Christianity in the Balkans, remember, it wasn't just about spiritual enlightenment. It was about empire building, cultural consolidation, and a bit of showing off, traits that make the Byzantines as fascinating as they are complex. The empire may have eventually crumbled, but its religious and cultural legacy is like Byzantine gold, timeless, influential, and a bit ostentatious, just the way they liked it. And with that, we leave the Balkans and their newfound faith to ponder the weight of their Byzantine inheritance. But fear not, there's more to uncover about how the Byzantines shaped, shook, and sometimes strong-armed their neighbors into a millennium of influence. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the economic and political machinations that kept this empire ticking like a finely crafted Byzantine timepiece. Speaking of Byzantine timepieces, let's wind up the political clock and dive into the Byzantine Empire's impact on Balkan politics and governance. Imagine a sprawling game of chess where every move is a calculated blend of diplomacy, marriage, and yes, the occasional eye-gouging. That's right, the Byzantines didn't just play the Game of Thrones, they invented the rulebook. First, let's talk alliances and betrayals. The Byzantines were the ultimate puppeteers, and the Balkans were their stage. When they weren't busy building cathedrals or drafting religious treaties, they were mixing political cocktails with a dash of intrigue and a twist of treachery. Consider this. The Byzantine approach to relationships was less happily ever after, and more keep your friends close and your enemies closer. They perfected the art of the alliance, often sealed with a politically advantageous marriage. Who needs roses when you have royal bloodlines to mingle? Take the case of Stefan Nemanja, the Grand Prince of Serbia from 1166 to 1196, who wasn't just a ruler but a master of the Byzantine balancing act. Nemanja knew the Byzantine Empire was the heavyweight in the ring, so he played nice when it suited him. He deftly navigated the shifting sands of allegiance, at times siding with Byzantium, and at others with their rivals. His rule was a tightrope walk over a geopolitical chasm, but he pulled it off with the grace of a trapeze artist and the cunning of Machiavelli himself. Yet, it wasn't all high-stakes diplomacy. The Byzantines had a more, shall we say, hands-on method of dealing with political rivals, into the infamous practice of blinding. In a world where power was often literally in sight, taking away someone's ability to see was a not-so-gentle nudge to step back from the political spotlight, or face a far darker fate. This method was brutal yet strangely practical. By blinding a would-be usurper, the Byzantines avoided the messiness of public executions while ensuring their enemies were effectively sidelined. It was a political retirement plan with a distinctly Byzantine flair. For those keeping score at home, this wasn't just cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was a strategic move that resonated throughout the Balkans. Rulers like Stefan Nemanja learned from the Byzantines' playbook, adopting similar tactics to consolidate power and eliminate threats. It was a harsh lesson in realpolitik, showing that in the Byzantine world, keeping your head on your shoulders sometimes meant losing your vision. But let's not forget the Byzantine Empire's contribution to governance and administration, where they laid down some serious bureaucratic foundations. While the court was embroiled in intrigue, the empire's administration was as well-oiled as a Byzantine war machine. They developed a system of governance that was both centralized and flexible, with a network of bureaucrats who kept the empire's wheels turning. This system was meticulously organized, an achievement in itself, considering the vast expanse of territories they controlled. The Byzantines were nothing if not pragmatic. They knew that a stable bureaucracy was essential for maintaining control, collecting taxes, and ensuring the smooth operation of an empire that stretched across continents. They weren't just about grand gestures and shiny mosaics. They were about the nitty-gritty of governance, and they left a legacy of administrative savvy that the Balkans, and indeed the world, would emulate for centuries. Their governance model was a bit like a Byzantine mosaic, intricate, interconnected, and designed to withstand the test of time. It laid the groundwork for modern states, influencing the way nations organize themselves even today. The Byzantine impact on Balkan governance was like a master class in statecraft, minus the PowerPoint presentations. As we wrap up this section, it's clear that the Byzantine Empire was a complex organism, capable of both inspiring awe and instilling fear. They knew how to wield soft power with a velvet glove and hard power with an iron fist, often at the same time. Their influence on the Balkans was profound, shaping not just the politics and governance of the region, but also its very identity. This empire wasn't just about soaring cathedrals and Byzantine mosaics. It was about the dark art of politics, the deftness of diplomacy, and the ruthless efficiency of governance. The Byzantines were the original power players, and their legacy is a testament to an empire that played the game of power like no other. But hold onto your togas, because we're not done yet. There's more to uncover about the Byzantine legacy, from their economic machinations to their cultural triumphs. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of this fascinating empire, one Byzantine knot at a time. As we dive deeper into the Byzantine world, let's play a little game of follow the money. The Byzantine Empire, much like a medieval Wall Street, was all about the Benjamins, or rather, the solidi. These gold coins were the currency standard from roughly the 4th century all the way to the 11th. Think of them as the Bitcoin of their age, only more stable and less likely to crash your 400 one. Trade was the lifeblood of the Byzantine economy, and nowhere was this more evident than in their relationship with the Balkans. Picture this. The Balkans were the empire's bustling backyard, a hub where trade routes crisscrossed like a well-worn tapestry. Thessaloniki, in particular, was the empire's second city, a vibrant marketplace where East met West. It was like the New York City of its day, minus the skyscrapers, but with just as much hustle. The Byzantines weren't just exchanging pleasantries with their Balkan neighbors. They were exchanging goods, lots of them. Olive oil and wine flowed like water, metals were mined and crafted, and let's not forget the crown jewel of Byzantine trade, silk. Oh, the silk. The Byzantines were the medieval version of today's Silicon Valley, holding a near monopoly on silk production. This wasn't just any fabric. It was the haute couture of the medieval world. If you weren't draped in Byzantine silk, were you even trying? But before you imagine silk-clad emperors sipping wine and nibbling on olives, remember that all this luxury came with a price tag. Byzantine taxes were the stuff of legend, and not in a good way. Their tax system was as convoluted as a Byzantine court intrigue, complete with a labyrinth of tariffs and duties that would make the modern IRS blush. The empire's tax collectors, or publicani, were probably about as popular as today's traffic cops, swooping in to collect dues with a menacing efficiency that could make even the most seasoned accountants squirm. You see, maintaining such a vast empire wasn't cheap. The Byzantines needed a steady stream of revenue to fund their lavish lifestyle, maintain their military, and keep the empire's administrative gears grinding. This meant taxes, and you guessed it, more taxes. But the Byzantines weren't just about taking. They knew how to give too. In return for the hefty tax burdens, they provided protection, stability, and a thriving marketplace where traders could ply their wares in relative security. However, not all that glittered was gold. The Byzantine Empire's grip on trade wasn't just about economic dominance. It was about control. They were the gatekeepers of the Silk Road, dictating who could trade what and with whom. This was economic warfare 101, and the Byzantines were the undisputed champions. Their strategic location allowed them to control key trade routes between Europe and Asia, turning the empire into a veritable toll booth for the medieval world. Now, if you're thinking all this sounds a bit too cutthroat for comfort, you wouldn't be wrong. The Byzantines were masters of the economic game, playing it with a ruthlessness that would make even the most jaded Wall Street broker take notes. Their silk monopoly wasn't just about making a quick buck. It was about securing their position as the economic powerhouse of the medieval world. But let's not forget the human element in all of this. The bustling trade cities like Thessaloniki weren't just economic centers. They were cultural melting pots. Traders from all corners of the empire and beyond would converge here, bringing with them not just goods, but stories, ideas, and cultures. It was like a medieval TED talk, with traders swapping tales of far-off lands while haggling over the price of olive oil. In this vibrant mix, the Balkans became a crucial player. They supplied raw materials, metals, and agricultural goods, feeding the insatiable appetite of the Byzantine markets. This wasn't just trade. It was a dance of diplomacy, power, and economic necessity. The Balkans were both the suppliers and the consumers, intricately woven into the fabric of the Byzantine economy. And while the Byzantines were busy counting their coins and spinning their silk, they left an indelible mark on the Balkans. The region absorbed not just Byzantine goods, but also their economic practices, legal systems, and cultural influences. It was a relationship of mutual benefit and occasional tension, a complex dance that shaped the economic and cultural landscape of the Balkans for centuries to come. As we wrap up this leg of our Byzantine journey, let's remember that this empire was more than just a collection of emperors and cathedrals. It was an economic powerhouse, a cultural crossroads, and a strategic masterclass. The Byzantine Empire didn't just influence the Balkans, it transformed them, leaving a legacy that's as rich and complex as a Byzantine tapestry. But there's more to explore. So, hold onto your Byzantine coins and stay tuned as we delve deeper into the empire's legacy. We've only just scratched the surface of the Byzantine world, and there are still plenty of Byzantine knots left to unravel as we leave behind the Byzantine economic machine, an enterprise so savvy it could turn a profit on a handshake. We're going to pivot to another legacy that transcends mere gold coins, art and culture. The Byzantine Empire, it turns out, was not just about the cash register ching. It was also about the artistic bling. They knew how to throw down a mosaic that could make modern art museums green with envy, and their influence on the Balkans was like a cultural tattoo that refuses to fade. Let's start with mosaics, those intricate jigsaw puzzles of colored glass and stone that still dazzle us today. Picture the Church of St. Sophia in Ohrid, Macedonia, a masterpiece of Byzantine mosaic art. Built in the 11th century, this church is a testament to the empire's flair for the dramatic. Its walls are adorned with images so vibrant they could make a peacock feel drab. These mosaics weren't just decoration. They were the medieval version of a PowerPoint presentation, telling stories of saints and sinners in a language everyone could understand. Each tiny tile was a pixel in the grand narrative of the Byzantine vision. And speaking of grand visions, the Byzantine take on iconography was nothing short of revolutionary. Icons were more than religious symbols. They were the Instagram influencers of their day, capturing the divine in a frame that could fit in your pocket or shrine. These weren't just paintings, they were spiritual selfies, meticulously crafted to communicate the mystique of the divine. The Balkans, ever the sponge for Byzantine culture, soaked up this artistic tradition, producing their own icons that still grace churches today. But let's not romanticize it all. For every breathtaking mosaic, there were countless artisans working tirelessly, often anonymously, to create these masterpieces. The Byzantine Empire was an artistic powerhouse, but it also had a knack for keeping its artists in the shadows, like the ghostwriters of the medieval world. And while the art was celestial, the conditions were often earthy, with artists working in cramped workshops under the watchful eyes of patrons who expected nothing short of divine perfection. Now, if we're talking about cultural legacies, we can't skip the Byzantine gift of music. The empire's influence on Balkan music was like a bass note that still reverberates through the region's folk songs and liturgical chants. Byzantine music was characterized by its use of modes, think ancient scales, that lent a certain ethereal quality to their chants. This wasn't just music to pass the time. It was a sonic bridge to the heavens, a way for the devout to feel a little closer to the divine. The echoes of Byzantine music can still be heard in the traditional songs of the Balkans. Take the polyphonic singing of the region, where voices weave together in a tapestry of sound that can transport you to another era. This is the Byzantine influence at work, a reminder that even though the empire fell in 1453, its cultural heartbeat never truly stopped. And therein lies the real magic of the Byzantine legacy, its ability to endure beyond the fall of its political power. The Byzantine Empire was like a star that went supernova. It may have collapsed under the weight of its own grandeur, but its cultural elements scattered across the Balkans, leaving a trail of artistic and musical stardust. But let's not get too lost in the Byzantine mystique. While it's tempting to view the empire through rose-tinted glasses, or perhaps stained glass, the reality was often more complex. The Byzantines were masters of crafting an image, of projecting power and divinity through art and architecture. But behind the gilded facade were real people with real struggles, artisans and musicians who labored under the patronage of emperors and church leaders who were as much about control as they were about culture. So, where does this leave us today? In the modern Balkans, traces of Byzantine traditions still echo in surprising ways. From the soaring domes of Orthodox churches to the intricate patterns of folk embroidery, the Byzantine influence is as much a part of the landscape as the mountains and rivers. It's in the way the light filters through a church window, casting a kaleidoscope of colors on the stone floor. It's in the haunting strains of a folk tune that seems to carry whispers of a bygone. Yet, for all its grandeur, the Byzantine Empire remains a study in contrasts, a place where the divine was always within reach, yet often shrouded in a fog of political intrigue and human ambition. It was an empire of paradoxes, where art and power walked hand in hand, each reflecting the other in a dance as intricate as any mosaic. As we close the book on Byzantium's legacy, let's remember it not just as a chapter in history, but as an ongoing story. Its cultural and artistic influences continue to ripple through the Balkans, a testament to an empire that knew how to leave a mark. And while the mosaics may crack and the icons may fade, the essence of Byzantium endures, a reminder that history's greatest legacies are often those that live on in the hearts and minds of the people they touch. So, the next time you find yourself in a Balkan church, gazing at a mosaic or listening to a chant, take a moment to appreciate the Byzantine brilliance that still shines through the ages. It's a legacy as enduring as it is enigmatic, and like all great stories, it's one worth revisiting time and time again. In the bustling streets of 19th century Warsaw, where horse-drawn carriages outnumbered modern conveniences by about 100 to 1, a young girl named Maria Skłodowska grew up with her nose perpetually buried in books rather than in the more typical pursuits expected of Polish girls at the time. This was no ordinary bookworm phase. Maria was more than a little obsessed with the wonders of science. Born in 1867, on November 7th to be precise, Maria came of age in a world where the phrase women in science was considered almost an oxymoron. Yet she couldn't care less about societal norms. The girl was on a mission. Maria's father, W. Ladislaw Skłodowski, was a physics and mathematics teacher, which sounds pretty standard, until you realize he was also a minor celebrity in their household for having a penchant for dismantling and reassembling scientific instruments. You know, as one does. Her mother, Branislawa, managed a boarding school for girls and taught her daughter more than a thing or two about resilience and hard work. But life in Warsaw wasn't all equations and educational pursuits. The Skłodowski family faced their share of hardships, financial straits, political tensions, and the loss of loved ones. Despite these challenges, Maria wasn't about to let adversity define her future. It was a time when Poland was under Russian rule and the cultural noose was tightening. Polish language and culture were being suppressed, and higher education opportunities were largely limited to men. But try telling that to Maria. She attended the so-called Flying University in Warsaw, a clandestine setup where women could learn in secret, away from the prying eyes of the authorities. And learn she did. It said she was quite the multitasker, attending classes that hopped from apartment to apartment like some covert academic flash mob. It's almost comically spy-like, don't you think? But it was no joke. It was a lifeline for women who thirsted for knowledge. By 1891, Maria made the bold decision to move to Paris to further her education, because when life gives you a lack of opportunity, you pack your bags and head to the city of light. Her transition from Maria to Marie came naturally as she immersed herself in French culture. But the challenges she faced were anything but natural. With her eye on the prize, a degree from the Sorbonne, Marie had to navigate a world where being a woman in science was akin to being a unicorn in a boardroom. Her financial situation was as precarious as a tightrope walker with a fear of heights. She frequently skipped meals to save money, which is a classic student move, but considerably less romantic when you realize it wasn't just occasional ramen noodles, but a genuine struggle for sustenance. Marie had her fair share of odd jobs to keep her afloat. She worked as a governess, a position that, while respectable, was more about survival than passion. It's hard to imagine her, future double Nobel Prize winner, teaching children their ABCs when she could have been unraveling the mysteries of the universe. Her study habits were equally unorthodox. Marie was known to cram beneath a leaky roof in her attic apartment, where the sound of rain could either lull her to sleep or serve as an unwelcome distraction, depending on her mood. It said she would wrap herself in every piece of clothing she owned to stay warm. Not exactly the glamorous life of a budding scientist, but hey, necessity is the mother of invention, or at least the mother of innovative layering. Despite these hardships, Marie's academic prowess was undeniable. By 1893, she earned a degree in physics, placing first in her class. A year later, she added a mathematics degree to her collection, because why stop at one when you can exhaust yourself for two? It was during this time that she met Pierre Curie, a fellow scientist who, unlike many men of his time, admired her intellect and determination. Their partnership would eventually change the world, but in the early days, it was their mutual respect and shared passion for science that laid the groundwork for their future collaborations. Marie Curie's journey from the streets of Warsaw to the academic halls of Paris is a testament to her relentless pursuit of knowledge. Her early life wasn't a string of romanticized triumphs, but a series of gritty realities faced with unwavering resolve. She wasn't just a woman in science. She was a force of nature with a penchant for defying the status quo. And if you think her story ends here, stick around, because the universe was just about to reveal its secrets to her, one radioactive element at a time. Marie Curie's adventure into the subatomic world began not with a bang, but with a curious whisper from the universe. By the late 1890, the scientific community was buzzing with the enigmatic glow of radioactivity, a term not yet coined, but already making waves, literally. Henry Becquerel had stumbled upon uranium's curious ability to expose photographic plates, even in the absence of light, like some kind of ghostly paparazzi. It was this oddity that caught Marie's scientific eye and set her on a path that would not only illuminate, but also irradiate the scientific world. Marie, now, Mrs. Curie wasn't exactly handed a state-of-the-art lab with cutting-edge equipment. No, she and Pierre were working out of a drafty old shed that was less science lab and more rustic storage unit. The place was so makeshift that it might as well have come with a sign saying, "Welcome to the School of Hard Knocks." But the Curries were not the type to be deterred by a little, or a lot, of inconvenience. They were in it for the discovery, not the decor. Now, let's talk about the scientific climate of the time. Picture a world where skepticism was the default setting, especially when it came to anything new or, heaven forbid, proposed by a woman. The late 19th century was not exactly brimming with gender equality. Women in science were considered a curiosity, like spotting a rare bird or finding a four-leaf clover. Marie had to contend with a lot more than outdated lab equipment. She faced a scientific fraternity that was more about the frat than the urnity. Despite the odds, Marie was relentless. She immersed herself in the study of uranium rays, determined to understand their nature. Through meticulous experimentation, she discovered that the intensity of the rays was directly proportional to the amount of uranium in the compound, a revelation that screamed for further investigation. But Marie wasn't content with just uranium. No, she had a hunch that there was more lurking in the shadows, and she was about to bring it to light. In 1898, Marie and Pierre announced the discovery of a new element, polonium, named after her beloved homeland of Poland. A nod to her roots, this was Marie's way of sticking it to the oppressive regimes that sought to erase her culture. But this was just the opening act. Later that same year, they discovered radium, an element so radioactive it practically glowed with its own brand of self-confidence. It was as if the universe had handed them a cosmic flashlight, and they were more than eager to shine it into the dark corners of the unknown. But let's not romanticize it too much. The process of extracting radium was about as glamorous as mining coal with a teaspoon. Marie and Pierre sifted through tons, literally tons, of pitchblende, a uranium-rich ore, to isolate just a fraction of a gram of radium. Imagine spending days, weeks, months stirring cauldrons of boiling, toxic sludge in a lab that was more sauna than sterile environment. And they did it all while dodging the skepticism of their peers, who were quick to dismiss their groundbreaking findings as mere anomalies or errors in calculation. In the midst of this scientific slog, Marie had an endearing habit that was as quirky as it was hazardous. She was known for carrying test tubes of radioactive materials in her pockets, like some kind of elemental fashion statement. Radioactivity chic, if you will. It's the kind of eccentricity that would make any modern health and safety officer break out in hives. But in those days, the dangers of radioactivity were as mysterious as the elements themselves. It was the wild west of science, and Marie was the gunslinger with a penchant for pocket-sized peril. The scientific landscape was a battlefield, and Marie was fighting on multiple fronts. Not only did she have to prove her discoveries, but she also had to navigate the treacherous waters of academic politics and gender bias. She was a woman in a man's world, and many of her contemporaries were more than happy to remind her of that inconvenient fact. Yet she persisted, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a determination that burned brighter than radium itself. Marie Curie wasn't just breaking barriers. She was obliterating them with the same intensity as the rays she studied. Her work laid the foundation for a new field of science, one that would revolutionize medicine, physics, and our understanding of the universe. But the path to enlightenment was far from straightforward. It was fraught with challenges, both scientific and personal, that would test her resolve at every turn. As she delved deeper into the mysteries of radioactivity, Marie found herself at the forefront of a scientific revolution. Her discoveries were not just isolated incidents. They were pieces of a puzzle that, when assembled, would challenge the very fabric of Newtonian physics. The old guard was being confronted with a new reality, one where the atom was not an indivisible sphere, but a complex structure with layers of untapped potential. Yet, despite the monumental impact of her work, Marie remained grounded. She wasn't in it for the accolades or the fame. She was in it for the thrill of discovery, the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. She was a scientist in the purest sense of the word, driven not by ego, but by an unyielding desire to understand the world around her. And so, the story of Marie Curie's groundbreaking work on radioactivity is not just a tale of scientific achievement, but also one of resilience, tenacity, and the relentless pursuit of truth. It's a saga that continues to inspire and challenge us to this day. But don't go thinking that this is the end of the story. Oh no, the plot is just thickening, and the world is about to see even more of what Marie Curie and her radioactive discoveries can do. Marie Curie's story was just heating up, much like the radium she so famously brought into the spotlight. Having already stirred the scientific part with her groundbreaking discoveries, Marie was poised to take her rightful place on the world stage. Not that she was craving the limelight, but fame has a peculiar way of finding those who least seek it. In 1903, the Nobel Committee in Stockholm decided to do something they had never done before: award a Nobel Prize in physics to a woman. And not just any woman. Marie Curie was about to add Nobel laureate to her already impressive resume. The 1903 Nobel Prize in Physics was split three ways, with Marie, Pierre, and Henry Becquerel sharing the honors. But let's not gloss over the fact that Marie's name was almost left off the list. The committee initially planned to award the prize only to Pierre and Becquerel. Enter Gustav Taman, a Swedish mathematician and one of the unsung heroes in this tale, who insisted that Marie's contributions were too significant to ignore. Kudos to Taman for recognizing that Marie wasn't just holding Pierre's lab coat. She was a scientific powerhouse in her own right. Winning a Nobel Prize today is like getting an Oscar, a Grammy, and a Pulitzer all rolled into one. And in 1903, it was an even bigger deal. The award catapulted Marie into the public eye, a place she found as comfortable as a bed of nails. Suddenly, she was not just a scientist, but a celebrity, her life dissected in the papers like a high-profile Hollywood divorce. The media frenzy was intense, and journalists were more interested in her womanhood than her work. It was as though her scientific achievements were a footnote to the fact that she was, shockingly, a woman doing things that women were not supposed to do. The societal impact of Marie's Nobel win was huge. She became a symbol of women's potential in a field dominated by men, a glowing beacon of progress in a world that still clung stubbornly to its gender biases. But let's not romanticize this too much. The attention was often less about admiration for her intellect and more about disbelief that a woman could be so accomplished. It was as if society collectively did a double-take, wondering if Marie was an anomaly or a harbinger of things to come. The newfound fame brought its own set of challenges. For one, the Curies suddenly found themselves swamped by requests, from interviews to speaking engagements, each more time-consuming than the last. Fame, it turns out, is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brought attention to their work and garnered much-needed funding. On the other, it was a distraction, pulling them away from the lab, where their true passion lay. Marie was not one to bask in the glow of celebrity. For her, the allure of the unknown was far more compelling than the flash of cameras. In the midst of this whirlwind, the Curies remained remarkably grounded. They navigated their newfound celebrity with the same methodical approach they applied to their experiments. They were offered various honors, titles, and even monetary rewards, many of which they politely declined. They also refused to patent the radium isolation process, a move that could have made them exceedingly wealthy. Instead, they chose to leave their research open to the scientific community, a gesture of intellectual generosity that was as rare then as it is now. The Curies weren't in it for the money. They were in it for the knowledge. But the societal impact of their discoveries was undeniable. Radium, the glowing wonder child of their research, found its way into everything from medical treatments to luminous watch dials. The world was enchanted by its luminescence, unaware, or perhaps willfully ignorant, of its dangers. Products like radium water and radium-infused cosmetics hit the market, promising health benefits that we now know were as fictitious as a unicorn's horn. The public was caught up in the radium craze, a testament to how easily fascination can blind us to reality. While the world gushed over the Curies' achievements, Marie remained focused on her work. She continued her research, driven by an insatiable curiosity that refused to be dimmed by accolades. In 1911, she made history once again, winning a second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for her work on radium and polonium. This made her the first person ever to win Nobel Prizes in two different scientific fields, a feat that remains rare even today. It was as if the universe wanted to remind everyone of the sheer magnitude of her genius, lest anyone forget amidst the noise of celebrity. Marie Curie's double Nobel win shattered ceilings and set a precedent that dared others to dream big. Yet, she remained an enigma, celebrated but often misunderstood. Her achievements were monumental, but the personal cost was significant. The constant exposure to radiation took its toll on her health, a grim irony given her life's work. Yet, she never wavered. Her dedication to science was unwavering, her focus unbroken even as the world around her seemed to be caught up in a perpetual state of awe and skepticism. As the Curies navigated their new reality, they remained true to themselves. They were pioneers not just in their scientific endeavors, but in the way they handled fame, a balancing act that required as much precision as their experiments. Marie's story, with its blend of triumph and tenacity, continues to resonate, offering both cautionary tales and inspiration. Her legacy is a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a noble endeavor, one that demands sacrifice, but promises discoveries that can change the world. And so, as we leave Marie and Pierre in their lab, amidst the chaos of their celebrity and the glow of their discoveries, we see not just the story of a remarkable woman, but of a partnership that defied convention. Their journey is far from over, and the ripples of their work continue to influence science and society in ways they could never have imagined. But that's a tale for another day, as the Curies' legacy unfolds in ways that continue to captivate and challenge us. As the Curies continued their dance with destiny amidst both the spotlight and the shadows of their lab, the world around them was changing, and not for the better. Enter World War I, a time when the concept of global conflict was being redefined with a brutal new syllabus. The war brought with it the kind of chaos that demanded innovation, and Marie Curie was not one to sit idly by while history unfolded without her input. Marie, ever the intrepid scientist with a knack for being in the right place at the right time, or perhaps the wrong place, depending on your perspective, decided to take her talents from the lab to the battlefield. She wasn't about to let a little thing like a world war stop her from applying her skills where they were needed most, into the development of mobile radiography units, or as they were colloquially known, Perit's Curies. These units were essentially X-ray machines on wheels, and they proved indispensable in the gruesome business of wartime medicine. The idea was deceptively simple: bring the technology to the injured, rather than schlepping the wounded back to a stationary X-ray machine. It was a logistical miracle wrapped in a metal box, powered by a car battery or a dynamo. Picture it, a battlefield littered with the injured, and here comes Marie's mobile miracle, ready to peer beneath the surface and reveal the unseen horrors within. By the end of the war, more than 200 such units were in operation, and over 1 million soldiers had been examined using this technology. Talk about leaving a mark on history, literally and figuratively. Of course, no good deed goes unpunished, and Marie's work during the war was not without personal cost. The constant exposure to radiation, combined with the stress of war and the demands of her work, took a toll on her health. Ironically, the very science she pioneered was slowly working against her. But let's not get too morose. Marie wasn't the type to wallow. She was too busy being a hero, albeit one with a slightly radioactive aura. Her contributions during the war weren't just about the technology. Marie also undertook the Herculean task of training technicians to operate these mobile units. She established courses at École Normale Supérieure in Paris, and by the time the war ended, she had trained over 150 women in radiology. That's right, Marie was not only revolutionizing wartime medicine, she was also giving women a foothold in a field that, like so many others, was dominated by men. These women, dubbed radiology nurses, were a crucial part of the war effort, proving that when it came to breaking barriers, Marie was an expert multitasker. Now, let's talk about the economic context of all this innovation. Financing war is no small feat, and neither is funding scientific advancement. Marie's initiatives required money, lots of it. She wasn't just a scientist. She was a fundraiser, tapping into her network of contacts, including the French government, to secure the necessary resources. It's a testament to her tenacity that she managed to keep the mobiles rolling despite the financial strains of a country at war. But even as she worked tirelessly to save lives, Marie's health was quietly deteriorating. The very radium she brought into the world with such fanfare was slowly taking its toll. You could say it was the ultimate irony, or just a cautionary tale about the dangers of playing with things that glow in the dark. Her skin bore the brunt of years of radiation exposure, but she soldiered on, driven by a purpose that transcended personal discomfort. Meanwhile, the legacy she was building was growing, even if she wasn't fully aware of it. The war ended in 1918, and the world slowly began to piece itself back together. Marie's contributions were recognized, but she was already thinking about the next chapter. This was a woman who never rested on her laurels, or anywhere else for that matter. Her focus shifted back to her research, her insatiable curiosity undimmed by the ravages of war or the passage of time. Marie Curie's story is one of paradoxes. She was both a pioneer and a victim of her own discoveries, a hero whose health was undermined by the very elements she brought to light. Her steadfast dedication to science and humanity was a beacon in times of darkness. And while she might not have sought to build a legacy, she was doing so with every experiment, every mobile radiography unit, and every life saved on the battlefield. In the end, Marie Curie was more than just a scientist. She was a force of nature, a trailblazer whose impact was felt far beyond the confines of her lab. Her work during World War was a testament to her enduring spirit, and a reminder of the power of science to change lives in even the most dire of circumstances. And while the story of her life is one of triumph and tragedy in equal measure, it is also one of hope, a hope that continues to inspire generations of scientists, dreamers, and innovators. But hold that thought, because Marie's story isn't quite over yet, and the twists and turns of her legacy are far from finished. Marie Curie's story, woven with threads of both triumph and tragedy, was far from its final chapter. Her legacy, though, was already cementing itself in the annals of history, like an indelible ink stain that refuses to fade. Even as her health waned, the world remained fascinated by the woman who had unlocked the secrets of the atom, and quite literally changed the world. If Marie Curie had been a rock star, she'd have had a world tour that never ended, her discoveries leaving an impact as lasting as a classic guitar riff. But let's not get too carried away with the metaphorical pyrotechnics. Her real legacy lay in the quiet, methodical revelations of science. By the time of her death in 1934, complications from a plastic anemia, a condition likely caused by prolonged radiation exposure, had taken their toll. Yet, Marie Curie left behind a treasure trove of advancements. Her work laid the foundation for modern physics and chemistry, and her discoveries in radioactivity paved the way for revolutionary medical treatments. The curious glow of radium, once a symbol of mystery and potential, eventually became a tool in the fight against cancer. It was a cosmic twist of fate that the element she helped bring to light would also be harnessed to save lives. It's like discovering that the monster under your bed is actually your best friend in disguise. Marie Curie's legacy continued to grow posthumously, transcending her own lifetime. In 1995, she became the first, and remains the only, woman to be laid to rest in the Pantheon in Paris on her own merits. Talk about breaking the ultimate glass ceiling. Her interment there wasn't just an honor. It was a decree from the nation of France acknowledging her unparalleled contributions to science and humanity. It was a nod to the fact that, while she might have left this world, her influence was very much alive, haunting the halls of academia like a benevolent ghost with a penchant for lab coats. But let's not get too misty-eyed. While Marie's story is often romanticized, it's important to remember the gritty realities that came with her groundbreaking work. The danger she faced from radiation was as real as it gets, and the scientific community took its sweet time catching up to the risks. It's a stark reminder of the perils of pioneering uncharted territories. Marie Curie's life serves as both an inspiration and a cautionary tale, an embodiment of the thin line between genius and recklessness. Her impact on society wasn't limited to science alone. Marie Curie became a symbol of perseverance, a beacon for women in fields traditionally dominated by men. The image of her poring over her experiments in a drafty shack is the stuff of legend, but it's also a call to arms for those who dare to dream beyond societal constraints. She showed that the pursuit of knowledge is a noble endeavor, even if it sometimes requires wearing every piece of clothing you own just to stay warm. The mythos surrounding Marie Curie has only grown with time, occasionally blurring the lines between the woman and the legend. Some tales stretch the truth to fit a narrative, like a pair of jeans one size too small, but the reality of her life was far more compelling than any fiction. She wasn't superhuman. She was human, period. Her story is a testament to the power of grit, determination, and a healthy disregard for the status quo. Her influence continues to ripple through the scientific community. Institutions worldwide have named buildings, awards, and even elements after her. Element 96, Curium, is a nod to her legacy, a fitting tribute that binds her name to the periodic table she helped redefine. It's a reminder that while the world might change, the impact of her discoveries remains constant, like a scientific North Star guiding generations of researchers and dreamers. Marie Curie's life also serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of safety in research. Her story is a cautionary tale that echoes through laboratories worldwide, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge should never come at the cost of one's health or safety. It's a lesson that resonates with the scientific community today, as new frontiers are explored with an ever-watchful eye on the potential for unforeseen dangers. In the grand tapestry of history, Marie Curie's contributions are woven with threads of brilliance and sacrifice. Her story is one of transformation, not just of elements, but of perceptions, opportunities, and possibilities. She was a trailblazer, not only in the world of science, but in the broader narrative of what it means to challenge and change the world. Her legacy, like the radioactive elements she studied, continues to glow with a light that refuses to be dimmed. And so, as we wrap up this tale of a woman who dared to peer into the abyss and pull back the veil of the unknown, remember this. Marie Curie wasn't just a pioneer. She was a revolution in a lab coat. Her life is a testament to the power of curiosity, the resilience of the human spirit, and the profound impact one person can have on the world. It's a legacy that continues to inspire and remind us that sometimes the most illuminating discoveries come from those who dare to ask, what if? So here's to Marie Curie, the woman who lit up the dark with her intellect and left a legacy that's anything but half life. A duchy steeped in poetry, power plays, and just a sprinkle of chaos. Welcome to Aquitaine in the early 12th century, where we find our heroine, Eleanor, growing up amidst a backdrop of troubadours and tenuous political alliances. Born in 1122, Eleanor of Aquitaine's early life was practically a medieval version of the real housewives, rich, dramatic, and occasionally scandalous. Her father, William X, Duke of Aquitaine, wasn't just any nobleman. He ruled over a region larger than the Kingdom of France itself, making him a medieval mogul with a penchant for poetry. This was a guy who hosted troubadours like they were rock stars, turning his court into a cultural hotspot that rivaled even the most glamorous scenes of today. Eleanor, or Aliena as she was originally named, had an upbringing that was unconventional, to say the least. Forget the needlepoint and modesty lessons typical of noble girls. Eleanor's world was one of political chess games and courtly love. She was more likely to hear a ballad about knights and ladies than to read a sermon, and that exposure shaped her into one of the most formidable women of her age. By the time she was 15, Eleanor was not just a pretty face in the court. She was a walking, talking symbol of power and influence, wrapped up in flowing robes and a crown of Aquitaine's finest. But let's not kid ourselves. Being a medieval duchess wasn't all minstrels and merriment. With great power came great responsibility, and Eleanor had to navigate a labyrinth of political landmines. The death of her father in 1137 flipped her world upside down. Suddenly, she was the Duchess of Aquitaine, a territory so vast and influential it made Paris look like a quaint little village. This was no small feat for a teenager, but Eleanor wasn't about to let a little thing like running a duchy get in the way of destiny. Enter Louis Roman VII, the young king of France, whose life was about to get a lot more interesting. Louis wasn't exactly a heartthrob, more of a pious type who preferred prayer to partying. But hey, this was a political match, not a dating show. In July 1137, Eleanor married Louis, and just days later, they were crowned King and Queen of France. Talk about a whirlwind romance, right? Well, if by romance you mean a union that was more about consolidating power than candlelit dinners. Their marriage, unfortunately, was less happily ever after and more awkward family photo. Eleanor, a woman of fiery spirit and wit, found herself paired with Louis, man whose idea of a good time was building churches. They were the medieval equivalent of mismatched socks. Louis, bless him, was more monk than monarch. and Eleanor wasn't about to spend her days in solemn devotion when there were troubadours to entertain and courts to command. Now, you might think that a royal couple with such different interests would find a way to make it work, but their idea of compromise was a second honeymoon, one that took them all the way to the Holy Land. Here's where it gets wild. In 1147, during the Second Crusade, Eleanor and Louis embarked on a journey that was supposed to be a glorious pilgrimage, but ended up resembling a Monty Python sketch. Picture this: Eleanor riding at the head of her own contingent of soldiers, wearing armor and commanding respect, while Louis pondered the theological implications of their trip. The crusade was a logistical nightmare. Louis's military strategy was about as sharp as a butter knife, and Eleanor's presence was seen as both a blessing and a curse. Her charisma and leadership were undeniable, but in the male-dominated world of medieval warfare, a queen in armor was more than just unusual. It was scandalous. Reports from the time describe Eleanor as a formidable force, rallying troops and organizing logistics, which was probably a good thing considering the Crusade's lack of direction. Yet the Holy Land adventure was less romantic getaway and more disastrous road trip. The couple's relationship deteriorated faster than you can say Jerusalem, with tensions mounting as they faced military defeats and personal disagreements. One famous incident involved Eleanor allegedly sharing a tent with her uncle, Raymond of Antioch. Whether this was a strategic meeting or something more salacious, the gossip mill went into overdrive, and Louis was less than amused. By the time they returned to France in 1149, their marriage was hanging by a thread. It didn't take long for the papal annulment papers to be signed in 1152, with the official reason being consanguinity. Essentially, they were too closely related. Convenient, right. In reality, it was more about their irreconcilable differences and the lack of a male heir, which was the royal equivalent of a conscious uncoupling. Eleanor, however, wasn't about to let a little thing like a failed marriage bring her down. In fact, she bounced back with the kind of resilience that would make modern celebrities envious. Within mere weeks of her annulment, she was engaged to Henry, Duke of Normandy, who would soon become Henry Roman II of England. But that's a tale for another time. For now, let's just say that Eleanor was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who turned the medieval world on its head, one awkward marriage at a time. While Eleanor was busy putting the finishing touches on her annulment party invitations, she was already eyeing the next chapter of her life, a chapter that would be signed, sealed, and delivered by none other than Henry, the Duke of Normandy. Now, if you think this sounds like a scandalous rebound, you're not wrong. But it's not just a tale of love at first sight. It's more like love at first political opportunity. Picture Eleanor, fresh from a conscious uncoupling, deftly navigating the turbulent waters of medieval power politics. She wasn't just looking for a partner. She was scouting for an ally with the ambition to match her own. Enter Henry, young, ambitious, and on the fast track to becoming Henry Roman II of England. This wasn't some starry-eyed courtship. It was a calculated merger. Within weeks of her annulment in 1152, Eleanor married Henry, and suddenly the political map of Europe was looking a whole lot different. Eleanor, the former Queen of France, was now poised to become the Queen of England, and this was more than a change of address. It was a seismic shift in power, akin to a political earthquake that sent shockwaves through the royal courts of Europe. But let's not pretend that Eleanor was merely a pawn in this game of thrones. Oh no, she was a player, a master strategist who understood that marrying Henry wasn't just about securing a throne. It was about securing a future for Aquitaine as a powerhouse in its own right. By joining forces with Henry, Eleanor brought her vast lands and her considerable influence into the fold, creating a realm that stretched from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees, a medieval superstate that would have made Charlemagne do a double take. This was a union that was as much about power as it was about passion, and it showed. The couple wasted no time consolidating their rule, and in 1154, Henry was crowned King of England with Eleanor as his queen. Together, they ruled over an empire that was not only vast, but also economically robust. Eleanor's lands in Aquitaine were rich with resources, including the lucrative wine trade, which was the medieval equivalent of having a controlling stake in Silicon Valley. The revenues from these lands helped to fuel the English treasury, providing the financial muscle needed to back Henry's ambitious plans. Of course, this power couple didn't always see eye to eye. Their marriage, much like Eleanor's first, was peppered with more drama than a soap opera marathon. But unlike Louis, Henry was no monk. He was a king with grand designs, and Eleanor was more than a match for him. Their relationship was a fiery one, filled with intrigue, betrayal, and enough plot twists to make Shakespeare envious. They were partners in power, but also rivals in ambition, with Eleanor often challenging Henry's authority and pushing back against his decisions. One of the most famous episodes in their tumultuous marriage came in 1173, when Eleanor, fed up with Henry's antics, including his well-documented infidelities, decided to take matters into her own hands. She threw her support behind her sons in a rebellion against their father, a move that would earn her a spot in the medieval Hall of Fame for audacity. The rebellion was a bold, albeit risky, play, and while it ultimately failed, it demonstrated Eleanor's willingness to defy convention and challenge even the mightiest of kings. For her troubles, Eleanor found herself imprisoned by Henry, spending the next 15 years under house arrest in various castles across England. But if you think this was the end of Eleanor's story, think again. Far from being a defeated queen, Eleanor used her time in captivity to plot her next move, proving that even in chains, she was a force to be reckoned with. It was a testament to her resilience and strategic acumen, qualities that had defined her life from the very beginning. While she was locked away, the world around her continued to change, and Eleanor kept her finger on the pulse of it all. She was deeply involved in the upbringing of her children, particularly her sons Richard and John, who would go on to become kings in their own right. Eleanor's influence on them was profound, and her legacy would be felt long after she was gone. Indeed, Eleanor's transition from Queen of France to Queen of England was not just a change in title. It was a transformation that reshaped the political landscape of medieval Europe. She was a woman who defied expectations, challenged norms, and left an indelible mark on history. Her story is one of power, passion, and perseverance, a saga that continues to captivate and inspire, even centuries later. As we prepare to delve deeper into this tale of intrigue and ambition, remember that Eleanor's life was not just about the crowns she wore, but the choices she made and the legacy she left behind. She was a queen who played by her own rules, and in doing so, she set the stage for a dynasty that would dominate Europe for generations to come. So hold on tight, because the next chapter in Eleanor's story promises more intrigue, more power plays, and yes, more drama than ever before. As Eleanor of Aquitaine stepped out of the shadow of her 15-year confinement, she was far from the defeated figure you might expect. Picture this, a queen not demurely retreating into obscurity, but roaring back into the political fray with the tenacity of a lioness defending her cubs. Eleanor had spent her time under lock and key wisely, honing her political instincts and preparing for the next act in her life, one that would see her not just as a queen, but as a mother with a kingdom to manage and a dynasty to secure. With Henry Roman II out of the picture by 1189, Eleanor's son Richard the Lionheart ascended the throne of England. If you thought family dinners were awkward before, imagine this. Eleanor's favourite son, renowned for his bravery and military prowess, but with a penchant for disappearing on crusades like some medieval globetrotter. Richard was the kind of guy who'd rather be in Jerusalem than sitting on a throne in chilly England. Enter Eleanor, stage left, ready to steer the ship while her son gallivanted across the Holy Land. You see, Richard's reign wasn't all about the kingly duties of statecraft. It was more about battles and bravery. In his absence, Eleanor effectively became the CEO of England, wielding power as his regent. She was the medieval equivalent of a multitasking modern mom, managing the kingdom's affairs while keeping her eye on the antics of her sons. And what a handful they were. Her younger son John, future king and notorious for his less-than-stellar reputation, was already causing headaches. Eleanor had to keep the unruly John in check, ensuring he didn't turn the kingdom into his own personal playground while Richard was away. But let's not kid ourselves. Eleanor's regency wasn't just about babysitting wayward princes. Her leadership was remarkable, a balancing act of diplomacy and strategy. She negotiated with barons, managed royal finances, and even dealt with the occasional rebellion. Picture a medieval spreadsheet filled with taxes and debts, and Eleanor patiently sifting through it all. She was a force of nature, ensuring that England remained stable and economically viable. Speaking of economics, let's talk about the cost of Richard's adventures. Crusades weren't cheap, and the king's escapades in the Holy Land came with a hefty price tag, a medieval version of maxing out the royal credit card. When Richard was captured and held for ransom in 1192, the demand was a staggering 150,000 marks, roughly equivalent to over £2 billion today. Eleanor, never one to back down from a challenge, mobilized resources across the realm to raise this astronomical sum. She was like a one-woman fundraising machine, rallying the kingdom to save her son. This was no small feat. Eleanor traveled across Europe, from castles to convents, shaking every proverbial money tree to secure Richard's release. She even pawned off royal treasures and squeezed every last coin from her lands in Aquitaine. The ransom was eventually paid, and Richard returned to England in 1194, thanks to Eleanor's relentless efforts. But let's pause and consider the bigger picture here. Eleanor's influence extended beyond just family ties and financial acumen. She was shaping the very fabric of medieval politics. Her ability to maneuver through the treacherous waters of court life, managing alliances and quelling dissent, was nothing short of extraordinary. She understood that power wasn't just about wielding a sword, but about the subtle art of persuasion and diplomacy. Her story, however, wasn't all triumph and celebration. The family feud that had seen her imprisoned by Henry Roman II lingered like a bad hangover. The Plantagenet clan was notorious for its internal squabbles, a dysfunctional family if there ever was one. Eleanor's role in this drama was complex. She was both the matriarch holding the family together and a political strategist navigating its treacherous dynamics. In the end, Eleanor's legacy was not just carved in stone or written in the annals of history. It was etched in the lives of her children and the kingdom she helped to shape. Her story is a testament to the power of resilience and the enduring influence of a woman who defied the conventions of her time. She was a queen who played by her own rules, and in doing so, she left an indelible mark on history. As we prepare to delve deeper into the next chapter of Eleanor's life, remember that her journey was far from over. With Richard back in the saddle and John waiting in the wings, the stage was set for more intrigue, more power plays, and yes, more drama than ever before. Eleanor's story is a saga of power, passion, and perseverance, a tale that continues to captivate and inspire, even centuries later. So hold on tight, because the best is yet to come. As the sun set on Richard the Lionheart's tumultuous reign, Eleanor of Aquitaine was hardly ready to hang up her crown and retire to a life of knitting and reminiscing about the good old days. Oh no, Eleanor had other plans. With Richard back on the English throne, she shifted her gaze further afield, to the next generation of Plantagenets who were already squabbling like cats in a sack. Rather than leaving her legacy to chance, Eleanor took a proactive approach, orchestrating marriage alliances that would make even the most seasoned diplomat blush with envy. Let's dive into Eleanor's matchmaking prowess. She was like the medieval version of a power-hungry Cupid, armed with a quiver full of political arrows. Her strategy was simple but effective, marrying off her grandchildren to secure alliances, build influence, and let's face it, keep the family drama at a simmer rather than a full boil. Take, for instance, her granddaughter Blanche of Castile. In 1200, Eleanor travelled, yes, even at the ripe age of nearly 80, to Castile to broker Blanche's marriage to the future Louis Roman VIII of France. This wasn't just a family picnic, it was a strategic masterstroke, ensuring peace, or at least a temporary truce, between England and France. Talk about killing two birds with one well-aimed marriage contract. But Eleanor's influence didn't stop at the altar. She also returned to her beloved Aquitaine, refusing to let her duchy slip into the hands of less capable managers. Aquitaine was her heartland, rich not only in vineyards, but in cultural significance, the kind of place where troubadours sang tales of love and valor, and courts buzzed with intrigue. Eleanor's return was not just a homecoming, it was a masterclass in regional governance. She maintained her authority, ensuring that Aquitaine remained a jewel in the Plantagenet crown, with its wine trade continuing to pour wealth into the family's coffers like a never-ending vintage. Now, about those troubadours and their tales of courtly love. Eleanor's court was often romanticized, was a sort of medieval Woodstock, filled with poets and minstrels extolling the virtues of noble love and chivalry. Myth of Queen of the Courts of Love painted Eleanor as a patroness presiding over debates about love's finer points. But let's not get carried away. While it's true that Eleanor's court was a cultural hub, the reality was less about heart-fluttering sonnets and more about political maneuvering. Love, in Eleanor's world, was less about stolen glances and more about strategic alliances. The so-called courts of love might have existed in the minds of poets, but in practice, they were likely gatherings where politics took precedence over poetry. Eleanor's life was a balancing act between the romantic ideals of the troubadours and the harsh realities of medieval power politics. She understood that while a good ballad could inspire, it was the hard currency of land, alliances, and military might that truly shaped kingdoms. And speaking of currency, let's not overlook the economic clout Eleanor wielded. Her territories, especially Aquitaine, were economic powerhouses. The region's wine trade was the medieval equivalent of owning a tech startup today, immensely profitable and highly influential. The revenues from Aquitaine helped bankroll her family's ambitions, providing the Plantagenets with the financial muscle to flex their power across Europe. Eleanor's later years were marked by a resilience that would put modern-day endurance athletes to shame. Even as she aged, she remained a formidable player on the European stage. She was a woman who refused to be sidelined, adapting to the shifting political landscape with the agility of a seasoned chess master. Her adaptability was key to her longevity. She weathered political storms that would have felled lesser figures, emerging each time with her influence intact. Her relationship with her son John, who ascended the throne after Richard's death in 1199, was a testament to her enduring political savvy. John, often remembered as the villainous Prince of Robin Hood fame, had a reputation for being as slippery as an eel in a barrel of butter. Yet Eleanor managed to maintain a degree of influence over him, guiding his decisions and tempering his more reckless impulses. It was a delicate dance, one that required Eleanor to wield her authority with a deft touch, balancing maternal care with political pragmatism. As we peel back the layers of Eleanor's later years, it's clear that her story is more than just a tale of romanticized chivalry and courtly love. It's a saga of power, strategy, and survival in a world where the stakes were as high as the towers of her beloved castles. Eleanor's legacy is one of resilience and adaptability, qualities that ensured her place in history long after the troubadours' songs had faded into the annals of time. So, as we approach the final chapter of Eleanor's extraordinary life, remember that her story is far from over. The stage is set for more intrigue, more alliances, and perhaps a few more surprises. Eleanor of Aquitaine was a queen who refused to go quietly into the history books, and her indomitable spirit continues to inspire us to this day. Stay tuned, because the saga of this remarkable woman is about to reach its thrilling conclusion. As Eleanor of Aquitaine's extraordinary saga draws to a close, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of her journey. This wasn't your typical medieval queen story, filled with passive pageantry and silent tapestries. Eleanor was a whirlwind of ambition and wit, a woman who transformed the chessboard of European politics while most of her contemporaries were content to be pawns. By the time she passed away in 1204, at the ripe old age of 82, a lifespan that could have earned her a spot in the Guinness Book of Medieval Records, she had left an indelible mark on the fabric of history. Eleanor's influence on European politics was nothing short of seismic. She was the original disruptor in a world that expected women to be seen and not heard. Her strategic alliances and political maneuverings didn't just ripple through her lifetime. They set the stage for generations to come. When she orchestrated marriages like a maestro conducting a symphony, she wasn't just building family ties. She was crafting a geopolitical landscape that would echo across continents. Her ability to negotiate and navigate through the tangled web of royal houses was unparalleled, a testament to her shrewd intelligence and iron will. But behind the grandeur, let's peel back the curtain and debunk some of the myths. While it's tempting to romanticize Eleanor as the embodiment of courtly love and chivalry, the reality was often grittier. Her life wasn't a fairy tale. It was more akin to a high-stakes poker game where every hand mattered. Eleanor understood that power wasn't simply bestowed through birthright or marriage. It was earned through wit, determination, and sometimes sheer audacity. Her legendary status as the queen of the courts of love might have been embellished by troubadours looking for a good story, but her actual legacy was forged in the crucible of realpolitik. Economically, Eleanor's impact was substantial. The lands she controlled, Aquitaine, with its lucrative wine trade, and the vast territories of the Angevin Empire were more than just pretty places on a map. They were economic engines that fueled the ambitions of her family. Forget knights in shining armor. Eleanor's true champions were the barrels of Bordeaux wine that filled royal coffers and funded military campaigns. Her understanding of economics was as sharp as any statesman's, demonstrating that political acumen wasn't the exclusive domain of men. When it came to shaping medieval culture, Eleanor wasn't about to let tradition dictate her role. She was a patron of the arts in an era where cultural patronage was often considered a luxury. Her courts became vibrant centers of learning and creativity, where the seeds of the Renaissance were quietly being planted. Eleanor's influence helped to nurture a culture that valued discourse and intellectual exploration, a precursor to the Enlightenment that would sweep across Europe centuries later. And let's not forget her role in redefining what it meant to be a woman in power. Eleanor didn't just sit on the sidelines, content with being a queen consort. She was an active participant in the governance of her territories, often outmaneuvering male counterparts who underestimated her at their peril. Her ability to wield influence in a male-dominated world wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a precursor to the battles for gender equality that continue to this day. Eleanor's life was a testament to the idea that leadership knows no gender, only vision and resolve. As we reflect on Eleanor's death in 1204, we must acknowledge the remarkable nature of her life. She was a survivor in a time when longevity was a luxury, and her passing marked the end of an era. Yet, her legacy lived on through her descendants, who continued to shape the political landscape of Europe. Her favorite son, Richard the Lionheart, and her less favored but equally significant son, King John, both carried the Plantagenet torch, albeit with varying degrees of success. Eleanor's story is a reminder that history is never as simple as it seems. The myths and legends that surround her are part of the narrative, but the truth is far richer and more complex. Eleanor was a woman of contradictions, romanticized yet fiercely pragmatic, celebrated yet often vilified. She was a queen who played by her own rules, not just surviving but thriving in a world that wasn't designed for her success. In the end, Eleanor of Aquitaine was more than just a queen. She was a force of nature. Her life was a testament to the power of resilience, the art of negotiation, and the enduring influence of a woman who refused to be defined by the limitations of her time. Her impact on European politics and culture is a legacy that continues to inspire, reminding us that history's greatest figures often defy easy categorization. Eleanor's story is not just a chapter in the annals of history. It's a timeless lesson in the power of determination and vision. As we close the book on her remarkable life, let's carry forward the lessons of her indomitable spirit, a beacon of possibility in a world that still has much to learn from her example. Palmyra, a bustling oasis smack in the middle of the Syrian desert, was kind of like the Las Vegas of the Roman Empire, minus the neon lights and all-you-can-eat buffets. With its opulent architecture and vibrant bazaars, Palmyra was the spot where East met West, a crossroads of cultures where Roman legions and Persian merchants shared a love of silk and spices. Into this cosmopolitan hub was born Zenobia, a woman destined to rattle the gilded cages of power. Zenobia's early life is shrouded in mystery, much like the foggy recollections of a night out in ancient Rome after one too many amphorae of wine. But we know she had some serious linguistic chops, fluent in Greek, Aramaic, and Egyptian. She could probably sweet-talk a snake out of its skin, and in a place like Palmyra, that was a skill worth its weight in incense. Now, Zenobia didn't just marry any old Joe from the corner of the south. She snagged Odenathus, a man who could have been the poster child for local boy makes good. Odenathus was a big deal, a military leader who had the Romans eating out of the palm of his hand. They even made him the corrector of the whole East, which sounds like an ancient Roman superhero title, but really meant He was the go-to guy for keeping the peace in that volatile region. And let's be honest, managing the East under Roman rule was like being the only sober person at a toga party. Lots of responsibility and plenty of hangovers. Zenobia, sharp as a tack, wasn't just a trophy wife. She was a political player in her own right. When Odenathus took charge of the region, she was right there beside him, likely whispering strategic advice in his ear, though the Romans would have pretended not to notice. After all, women in power. Scandalous, but Zenobia didn't bat an eyelash. She had her sights set on more than just the social scene. Palmyra, with its mix of Roman, Persian, and local influences, was a cultural melting pot that made the United Nations look like a neighborhood watch meeting. It wasn't just a place where goods changed hands, but where ideas, fashions, and even gods were up for grabs. This was a city where you might find yourself debating philosophy with a Greek scholar in the morning and haggling over silk prices with a Parthian trader by noon. Zenobia thrived in this eclectic atmosphere, soaking up knowledge and alliances like a sponge in the desert. And let's talk about the Romans for a moment. Known for their bureaucracy as much as their legions, they loved nothing more than a good spreadsheet. If ancient Rome had Excel, you can bet they'd have used it to track everything from grain supplies to gladiator stats. To them, Palmyra was a valuable asset, a buffer zone between the Roman Empire and the potentially pesky Persian Empire. But here's the kicker. Zenobia had no intention of playing by the Roman rulebook. She was a woman with a plan, and she was playing the long game. Odenathus might have been the face of Palmyra's leadership, but Zenobia was the brains behind the operation. Her marriage was a partnership in every sense, and when tragedy struck with Odenathus's assassination in 267 AD, an event that has conspiracy theorists buzzing to this day, Zenobia didn't miss a beat. She took the reins of power with a grace that would make even the most seasoned Roman senator spill his wine in surprise. Zenobia's ascent was not just a testament to her savvy, but to Palmyra's unique position as a hub of trade and culture. The city's wealth was not merely in its coffers, but in its ideas, and Zenobia embodied that spirit. She was a queen who understood the importance of image and influence, a ruler who could navigate the treacherous waters of politics with the ease of a seasoned sailor. So as Zenobia stepped into the limelight, she did so with the full knowledge that she was more than just a queen of a desert city. She was a symbol of resistance and ambition, ready to challenge the status quo and perhaps teach the Romans a thing or two about what it really meant to rule. And if she could do all that while speaking 3 languages and managing a diverse empire, well, that's a legacy worth raising a goblet to. Zenobia stepped into the limelight, and it was clear that she was more than just a queen of a desert city. She was a symbol of resistance and ambition, ready to challenge the status quo and perhaps teach the Romans a thing or two about what it really meant to rule. And if she could do all that while speaking 3 languages and managing a diverse empire, well, that's a legacy worth raising a goblet to. Now, let's talk about Zenobia's power grab after Odenathus's untimely demise, a move slicker than a Persian silk merchant. When Odenathus was assassinated in 267 AD, the political landscape was as unstable as a toga-clad Roman after a night of bacchanalian revelry. But where others might have seen chaos, Zenobia saw opportunity. With her husband out of the picture, Zenobia wasn't content to play the grieving widow. She had a kingdom to secure, and she wasn't going to let a little thing like political upheaval stop her. Zenobia's first move was to secure her son, Vabilathus, as the rightful successor. But let's be real, Vabilathus was still wet behind the ears, so Zenobia stepped in as regent, a role she embraced with all the flair of a seasoned general. Her next move, expansion, baby. Zenobia wasn't about to let the Roman Empire dictate her limits. She eyed the territories around her like a chess master sizing up the board, ready to make her move. Her military campaigns were nothing short of audacious. Zenobia's army, reported to be a force of over 70,000 troops, was a well-oiled machine, thanks in part to the training and discipline instilled by Odenathus. These weren't just any soldiers. They were a multicultural mix of Palmyrans, Syrians, and other local groups, all united under Zenobia's banner. And let's not forget the cavalry, those swift, bow-wielding horsemen who could outmaneuver a Roman legion faster than you can say imperial overstretch. Zenobia's boldest move was the capture of Egypt in 270 AD. Yes, Egypt, the breadbasket of the ancient world, a land as rich in resources as it was in history. By seizing Egypt, Zenobia not only bolstered her empire's grain supply, but also controlled a critical segment of the Mediterranean trade routes. Talk about an economic power play. This move undoubtedly sent shockwaves through the Roman elite, who were probably clutching their togas in disbelief. And here's where the PR genius of Zenobia comes into play. Depending on who you asked, she was either a liberator or a rebel. To the locals in Egypt and the surrounding regions, Zenobia was a refreshing change from the heels of Roman boots. She portrayed herself as a restorer of ancient traditions, even going so far as to claim descent from Cleopatra to bolster her image. To the Romans, however, she was a nuisance, a thorn in the imperial side that needed plucking. But Zenobia knew how to spin a narrative. She wasn't just a queen. She was a master of public relations long before Instagram influencers made it trendy. Her empire, at its height, stretched from Egypt in the west to Anatolia in the north, covering some of the most lucrative trade routes of the ancient world. The economic boost from controlling these pathways was like striking oil in a gold mine. Palmyra became the beating heart of a trading empire, and Zenobia was its iron-willed queen, orchestrating a symphony of commerce and culture. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate the irony. Here was Zenobia, a woman in an era where female rulers were as rare as a Roman senator with a conscience, outmaneuvering some of the biggest egos in history. The Roman emperors, with their grand titles and even grander ambitions, must have been seething. They were the self-proclaimed masters of the universe, and yet here was Zenobia, a woman from the desert, flipping the script and making them look like amateur hour. But the Romans were nothing if not persistent. As Zenobia expanded her empire, the Roman emperors were plotting their comeback. Emperor Aurelian, in particular, was not amused by Zenobia's antics. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, known for his military prowess and a fondness for restoring order with an iron fist. Aurelian wasn't about to let Zenobia keep her empire without a fight. The stage was set for a showdown between Zenobia and Aurelian, a clash of titans that would determine the fate of Palmyra and its ambitious queen. But let's save that for the next part of our saga, because trust me, the drama is just getting started. And as history has taught us, the line between legend and reality is often as thin as a Roman coin. As the dust settled on Zenobia's audacious empire, her reign stood as a testament to both defiance and diplomacy, a dazzling combination of palace intrigue and battlefield brilliance. If there was ever a time when Zenobia flexed her Wonder Woman muscles, this was it. But let's not just admire the glint of her crown. Let's dig into the nuts and bolts of how she managed to keep the wheels of her sprawling domain spinning. Zenobia's administration was as efficient as a Roman chariot race, and just as thrilling. She wasn't just about conquering lands. She was about running them like a well-oiled machine. Take her tax system, for instance. It wasn't just a series of random levies tossed at her subjects like confetti at a parade. Zenobia implemented a structured tax system that would make even the most fastidious Roman bureaucrat nod in approval. She understood that a kingdom's power wasn't just in its army, but in its coffers, a lesson even the Romans sometimes forgot amidst their endless conquests. Speaking of coffers, Zenobia knew the currency was more than just shiny metal used to buy the latest toga trends. She reformed the currency in her territories to stabilize the economy, ensuring that her coins didn't lose value faster than a Roman senator's promises. These reforms were critical, especially when you're running a trade empire that spanned from the sands of Egypt to the rocky shores of Anatolia. Money talks, and Zenobia made sure it was speaking her language. But it wasn't just about taxes and coins. Zenobia had a vision for urban planning that would make any modern city planner tip their hard hat. Palmyra under her rule was not just a city. It was a metropolis that hummed with the energy of commerce and culture. The streets of Palmyra were lined with grand colonnades and bustling markets where you could haggle for everything from spices to silk, while the architectural marvels of the city testified to its splendor. Zenobia's urban initiatives were not just about aesthetics, though Palmyra was as Instagram-worthy as ancient cities get, but about creating hubs of economic and cultural activity that fueled her empire's engine. And let's not forget the charm offensive. Legends paint Zenobia as a Cleopatra too. Zero, with allure and intellect that could bend the most stubborn of wills. But hold your horses. This isn't just a tale of seduction and sorcery. Zenobia was a shrewd political operator, fully aware that power sometimes lay in perception as much as it did in policy. Sure, she claimed descent from Cleopatra, but that was less about channeling a romanticized past and more about crafting a compelling narrative that resonated with her subjects. After all, nothing says legitimate ruler like tying yourself to one of history's most iconic queens. Now, let's talk about the Romans' favorite pastime, painting Zenobia as a femme fatale, a seductive siren leading men astray. This was classic Roman propaganda, more fiction than fact. They needed a scapegoat for their failures and a story to sell back home. Zenobia, in their eyes, was the perfect villain, a woman who dared to play the game of thrones better than the men. But in reality, Zenobia was just a ruler who played her cards with skill and precision, proving that political acumen knows no gender. Yet, Roman scribes would have you believe she was some sort of enchantress, casting spells with a flick of her wrist. But let's be honest, Zenobia didn't need magic to outwit the Romans. She had something far more potent, a keen understanding of power dynamics, and a brain that could strategize circles around her contemporaries. She was no mere pawn on the chessboard of history. She was the queen, making moves that echoed across empires. Zenobia's reign wasn't just a flash in the pan. It was a masterclass in leadership. Her ability to juggle palace intrigue with military campaigns was nothing short of legendary. But more than that, it was her vision for an independent Palmyra that set her apart, an empire that wasn't just a puppet of Rome, but a player in its own right. Her efforts to build a self-sufficient state were as impressive as her battlefield victories, and perhaps even more enduring. But let's not kid ourselves. Zenobia's reign wasn't all sunshine and roses. Running an empire was as much about putting out fires as it was about basking in glory. She had to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics, where alliances shifted faster than desert sands. Her advisors and generals were a mixed bag of loyalty and ambition, and trusting the wrong person could lead to disaster. Yet, Zenobia managed to keep her inner circle in check, leveraging her charisma and intellect to maintain a delicate balance of power. Ultimately, Zenobia's reign was a blend of reality and myth, a cocktail of facts and fables that history has served up with a twist. Her achievements were as tangible as the coins she minted, while the legends surrounding her are as intoxicating as a night in the Palmyrene desert. As we continue to unravel her story, remember that Zenobia was more than just a name in a history book. She was a force of nature, a ruler who dared to dream bigger, and a woman who left an indelible mark on the pages of history. And rest assured, there's more to this tale, so stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. But before we dive into the fireworks of Roman retribution, let's take a moment to savor the audacity of Zenobia's ambition. Her empire wasn't just a blip on the historical radar. It was a full-blown challenge to Rome's supremacy. And let's get one thing straight. Rome did not take challenges lightly. In fact, they took them about as lightly as a gladiator takes a nap in the Colosseum's lion pit. Now, enter Emperor Aurelian, the Roman equivalent of a grumpy cat with a sword. Aurelian wasn't exactly known for his sunny disposition or lenient policies. This guy was all about order and discipline. Picture a Roman general who had the people's skills of a particularly irritable cactus, yet the military acumen of a seasoned chess grandmaster. He saw Zenobia's burgeoning empire as a loose thread in the tightly woven toga of Roman control, and he was determined to yank it back into place. The turning point in this historical drama came when Aurelian decided that Zenobia's empire was getting a tad too big for its sandals. It's one thing to have a bustling trade city like Palmyra in your sphere of influence, but it's another thing entirely when that city starts acting like it's the new Rome. Aurelian's message to Zenobia was clear. We want our stuff back, and by stuff, we mean Egypt, Anatolia, and all the shiny bits in between. So, Aurelian gathered his legions, a formidable force numbering around 70, 000, complete with the latest in Roman military chic chainmail, short swords, and that classic red cloak that says, "I mean business." His strategy was straightforward. March east, crush Zenobia, and restore Roman order, which, let's face it, was code for, let's see how many taxes we can squeeze out of these territories. The military campaign kicked off in 272 AD, and it was brutal, even by ancient standards. Aurelian's troops were a well-drilled machine, with more precision than a Roman sundial. They advanced through the eastern provinces like a hot knife through butter, reclaiming cities that had been under Zenobia's control. Meanwhile, Zenobia wasn't about to roll over and let her empire crumble. She rallied her forces, a diverse mix of Palmyrens, Syrians, and Egyptians, numbering an impressive 70,000 as well. It was a showdown for the ages, with both sides gearing up for a clash that would make the Battle of Cannae look like a schoolyard scuffle. The campaign reached its crescendo at the Battle of Emesa. This was where the rubber, or in this case, the leather sandals, met the road. Emesa, now known as Harms in modern-day Syria, was the site of a military engagement that would decide the fate of Zenobia's empire. The Roman legions, with their disciplined formations and superior weaponry, faced off against Zenobia's forces, who were known for their cavalry and guerrilla tactics. Aurelian, ever the shrewd strategist, employed a classic Roman tactic, the feigned retreat. It's the ancient equivalent of playing hard to get. His troops pretended to retreat, luring Zenobia's forces into a trap. And like clockwork, when Zenobia's cavalry charged in for what they thought was a victory, the Romans turned around, encircled them, and delivered a crushing blow. The battle was as much about psychological warfare as it was about swords and shields. The aftermath of the Battle of Emesa was a turning point. Zenobia's forces were routed, and she was forced to retreat to the fortified city of Palmyra. But the damage was done. Her empire, which had once seemed like a rising star, was now on the brink of collapse. Aurelian, not one to let a good conquest go unfinished, continued his pursuit, determined to bring Zenobia to heel. But let's pause here for a moment of gallows humor. Imagine the logistics of ancient warfare, moving tens of thousands of troops across desert landscapes, dealing with supply lines that were about as reliable as a Roman senator's oath. And yet, both sides managed it. The Romans, with their legendary roads, could at least count on a somewhat smoother ride, while Zenobia's forces had to rely on local knowledge and a bit of good old-fashioned luck. As Aurelian's legions marched towards Palmyra, the city braced for what was to come. Zenobia, ever the defiant leader, wasn't about to surrender without a fight. But even the best-laid plans can crumble under the weight of overwhelming odds. The Roman siege of Palmyra was relentless, and Zenobia's options were dwindling faster than a sandcastle in a sandstorm. In a last-ditch effort, Zenobia attempted to flee eastward, hoping to muster support from the Persian Empire, but she was captured on the banks of the Euphrates River, a testament to both her daring spirit and the harsh realities of ancient geopolitics. Her capture marked the end of Palmyra's independence, and Aurelian's triumph was complete. But what of Zenobia herself? Legend has it that she was paraded through Rome in golden chains, a spectacle designed to remind everyone of Rome's might, and to humiliate a queen who had dared to defy an empire. Yet, some accounts suggest she was later granted a villa in Tibur, modern-day Tivoli, where she lived out her days in relative comfort. It's a fate that, while not exactly triumphant, speaks to the grudging respect she commanded, even in defeat. So, as we leave Zenobia at this crossroads of history, remember that her story isn't just one of rebellion and conquest. It's a tale of ambition and defiance, of a woman who dared to challenge the status quo, and, for a brief moment, succeeded. And while the Romans may have had the last laugh, Zenobia's legacy endures, a reminder that history is shaped not only by those who win, but by those who dare to try. Stay tuned, because there's more to unravel from the tapestry of Zenobia's life. Her story isn't over yet, and the echoes of her reign continue to resonate through the annals of history. Ah, Zenobia, once the queen of an empire that dared to thumb its nose at Rome, now standing at the crossroads of historical legacy. Her story is a tapestry woven with audacity, ambition, and a splash of geopolitical drama worthy of a Netflix series. But now, as the dust settles, let's explore the aftermath of her capture, the decline of Palmyra, and the myths that have turned her life into a blend of legend and reality. After Zenobia's capture by Aurelian, her fate was the subject of much debate, not unlike the office water-cooler gossip about who'll get the next promotion. The Romans, ever the masters of propaganda, paraded her through the streets of Rome in golden chains, a not-so-subtle reminder of what happens when you mess with the empire. This wasn't just a spectacle. It was a calculated move to bolster Aurelian's image as the emperor who tamed the East's wild ambitions. Yet, despite the humiliation, Zenobia's allure was hard to shake off. The Romans, who might have expected her to be a broken shell of a queen, found instead a woman who, if accounts are to be believed, held her head high, embodying a defiance that even chains couldn't suppress. This wasn't just about parading a defeated enemy. It was about showcasing the indomitable spirit of a woman who had challenged Rome and made them sweat. So, what happened after the parade? According to some sources, Zenobia was allowed to live out her days in Tiber, retreat outside Rome, which today is Tivoli. Imagine this, a former queen, once commanding armies and negotiating with emperors, now living in relative comfort, perhaps sipping wine in a villa while reminiscing about the days when she was the toast of Palmyra. It's a fate that lies somewhere between exile and retirement, less glamorous than ruling an empire, but certainly better than the alternative. But here's where history gets fuzzy, like trying to read a scroll by candlelight. Documents from the time are scarce, and the lines between what happened and what was spun by Roman scribes are as blurred as the edges of an ancient map. Some claim Zenobia became a Roman matron, marrying into the aristocracy and even raising children who would go on to serve in the Roman military. Others suggest she simply faded into obscurity. Whether she was a Roman trophy or a retired noblewoman, the fact remains. Zenobia's legacy didn't end with her capture. It transformed. You see, Zenobia's story is more than the sum of her military campaigns and political machinations. It's a narrative that forces us to confront the roles of women in leadership, even today. In an era when women were often relegated to the sidelines, Zenobia seized the stage with a flair that made even the most seasoned Roman senators take notice. She proved that leadership wasn't tied to gender, but to vision and tenacity. A lesson that, let's face it, some corners of the modern world are still catching up to. The myth of Zenobia, however, is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's romantic to picture her as a reincarnation of Cleopatra, a figure as alluring as she was cunning. On the other, these legends often overshadow the real, tangible achievements she made, like reforming the tax system, stabilizing currency, and transforming Palmyra into a city that rivaled the grandeur of Rome itself. The reality is that Zenobia was a shrewd operator, a leader who knew how to wield power and influence effectively, no magic or enchantment required. The decline of Palmyra post-Zenobia was as swift as it was tragic. Without her unifying presence, the city lost its footing, its strategic importance dimming as the Romans reasserted control over the region. Palmyra, once a bustling hub of trade and culture, became a cautionary tale of what happens when ambition pushes the boundaries of imperial patience. Yet, despite its fall, the echoes of its former glory can still be found in the ruins that attract historians and tourists alike, reminders of a time when a city in the desert dared to defy the greatest empire the world had known. In the end, Zenobia's story is both a cautionary tale and a testament to her audacity. It's a reminder that ambition can be a double-edged sword, capable of carving out empires, but also of cutting them down. Yet, it's also a testament to the power of daring to dream beyond the confines of one's age. Zenobia, in all her complexity, remains a figure of fascination, a woman who defied convention and reshaped history in her image. So as we close the book on her story, let's raise a goblet to Zenobia, not just as a fallen queen, but as a timeless symbol of boldness and resilience. And with that, let's remember, history's greatest figures are often those who dared to color outside the lines, challenging the status quo and leaving a legacy that resonates long after the sands of time have covered their tracks. Zenobia may have lost her empire, but she won something far more enduring, a place in the annals of history that no chain, golden or otherwise, could ever contain. In the windswept expanses of Scandinavia, where the sun plays hide and seek with the icy fjords, a pantheon of gods once roamed the minds and hearts of the Norse folk. These deities weren't your run-of-the-mill, halo-wearing types. Oh no, they were as complex and unpredictable as the northern weather itself. From Odin, the one-eyed king of the gods who had a penchant for wisdom and a disturbing habit of hanging himself from trees for enlightenment, to Loki, the original trickster whose antics could make even the most chaotic family reunion look orderly. This was a cast straight out of a mythological soap opera. Now, before you get too cozy with the romanticized image of horned helmets and mead halls echoing with tales of valor, let's take a closer look at the gritty reality. The Norse mythology we've come to know is just as much about survival as it is about sagas of gods and heroes. These stories were a reflection of the harsh, often brutal realities of Viking life. Picture a time around 800 to 1050 AD, sometimes dubbed the Viking Age, when long winters and short growing seasons made every resource as precious as gold. Archaeologists have dug up graves and settlements from this era, unearthing treasures and trash alike. Because let's face it, one man's trash is another man's key to the past. Among the finds are intricate carvings and runestones, some dating back to as early as the 8th century. These artifacts serve as our historical breadcrumbs, leading us to a clearer understanding of how the Norse viewed their world and their place in it. The Norse pantheon was a divine family tree that would make any genealogist break out in hives. Odin, the All-Father, wasn't just the head honcho. He was a wanderer, a seeker of knowledge, and occasionally a bit of a jerk. His quest for wisdom once led him to sacrifice an eye at Mimir's well, a decision that might make modern self-help gurus cringe. But hey, who are we to judge the methods of ancient gods? Thor, the thunder god with a hammer that would put any modern toolkit to shame, was another staple of Norse lore. His adventures were the stuff of legend, involving everything from wrestling giants to cross-dressing. Yes, really, look up the tale of him, and Loki dressing as brides to retrieve Thor's stolen hammer. These stories, while entertaining, also served a purpose. They offered explanations and moral lessons that resonated with a society constantly at the mercy of nature's whims. But let's not forget Loki, the god who could give any modern-day troublemaker a run for their money. Loki, with his silver tongue and shape-shifting antics, was the embodiment of chaos and unpredictability. He was the kind of deity who would crash a party just to stir the pot, and then vanish, leaving everyone else to clean up the mess. Yet, in a world as volatile as the Norse landscape, Loki's presence was a reminder of life's inherent uncertainty. These deities and their stories were more than just bedtime tales. They were a way to make sense of a world where survival was a daily challenge. The Norse lived in a world defined by its extremes, from the freezing darkness of winter to the midnight sun of summer. And their gods, with all their flaws and foibles, mirrored the unpredictable and often harsh nature of their environment. The myths weren't just about entertainment. They were a survival guide wrapped in allegory. Consider Ragnarok, the Norse apocalypse, a cataclysmic event that would wipe out gods and men alike. While it sounds like a blockbuster movie plot, it was a sobering reminder of the inevitability of endings and the cyclical nature of life. It's the kind of tale that would make even the most optimistic Viking pause and think about stockpiling a few extra supplies for winter, just in case. As we peel back the layers of Norse mythology, it becomes clear that these stories were deeply intertwined with the realities of Viking life. They provided a framework for understanding the world, offering both comfort and caution. The gods, with their larger-than-life personas, were reflections of human strengths and weaknesses, a mirror held up to the people who worshipped them. And speaking of worship, let's not gloss over how these myths were woven into the very fabric of Norse society. Rituals and offerings were as much a part of daily life as farming and raiding. The Norse didn't just hope for divine intervention, they actively courted it. Evidence suggests that sacrifices, sometimes of animals, and in grim cases, humans, were part of religious ceremonies meant to curry favor with the gods. The stakes were high, and the Norse were nothing if not pragmatic in their approach to pleasing their deities. This was a time when a good harvest or a successful raid was attributed to the gods' favor, while misfortunes were often seen as divine displeasure. It was a world where the spiritual and the practical were two sides of the same coin, and the gods were as much a part of the landscape as the mountains and seas. So, as we embark on this exploration of Norse religious practices, let's keep in mind that these myths, with all their drama and intrigue, were a vital part of what it meant to be Viking. They were stories of survival, identity, and the eternal dance between man and the gods, tales that continue to captivate us, not because they're relics of a bygone era, but because they speak to the enduring human condition. And who knows, maybe there's a little bit of Loki in all of us, waiting for the right moment to stir up some mischief. Just as the Norse gods were reflections of human nature, their rituals and ceremonies were mirrors of the society that created them. We're talking a practical, no-nonsense approach here, because when winter's teeth are sinking in and the sun's playing hide and seek, you can't afford to be too whimsical. Let's dive into the earthen mounds and sacred groves where the Vikings got down to some serious spiritual business. First up, sacrifices. Now, before your mind conjures up an image of a goat tied to a stone altar, let's clarify. Sacrifices in Norse practice were a mix of the bloody and the symbolic, the grand and the mundane. Animal sacrifices were common, with pigs, horses, and cattle often meeting their end in a bid to win the gods' favor. The infamous blood, a sacrificial feast, was a blend of solemnity and revelry, where blood was considered a potent offering to the divine. They'd splash it on altars, idols, and even themselves in a ritualistic version of a modern-day rock concert's marsh pit. Human sacrifice, though not as widespread as some might think, did occur. Remember, this was an era where life was precarious, and the gods' goodwill was seen as essential as a sturdy longship. Tacitus, the Roman historian, tells us of a ritual involving the hanging of men in sacred groves. And while it might sound like a scene from a horror film, it was rooted in the belief that such offerings could influence the gods to secure a bountiful harvest or victory in battle. But before you rush to judge these practices as barbaric, consider the context. The Norse lived in a world governed by harsh natural laws, and their religious practices reflected the urgency of their survival. These sacrifices weren't just about appeasing the gods. They were acts of community solidarity, where every member had a role to play in the collective well-being. The communal feasts that followed sacrifices were as much about strengthening social bonds as they were about divine petitioning. Festivals, on the other hand, were where Norse religion put on its party hat. The most famous of these was the Yule festival, a midwinter celebration that predated the Christmas we know today. Yule, or Jarl, was a time to honor the return of the sun, a critical moment in the calendar when the days finally began to lengthen. The festivities were rife with toasting, feasting, and even a bit of ancient karaoke as participants sang songs to honor the gods and ancestors. This wasn't just merrymaking for merrymaking's sake. It was a ritual to ensure the sun's return and the survival of the community through the remaining winter months. And let's not forget the Viking assembly where political decisions were made and disputes settled. While not strictly a religious gathering, it was imbued with a sacred dimension. The thing represented the divine order of society, a place where laws, believed to be divinely inspired, were upheld. It's a reminder that in the Norse world, religion and politics were as intertwined as Thor and his hammer. Now, behind all these rituals lay a pragmatic economic layer. Sacrifices, while spiritually significant, also had a very real impact on resources. Offering a prized animal was no small feat. It was a loss in terms of labor, food, and wealth. Yet, the act of giving up something valuable was believed to ensure that the community as a whole could prosper. It's a bit like giving up your last slice of pizza to the deity of takeout in hopes of more bountiful deliveries in the future. The social implications were equally profound. These rituals reinforced social hierarchies, with leaders often playing central roles in the ceremonies. The chieftain, for instance, would lead the blot, not just as a spiritual leader, but as a political one, reaffirming his status and authority. It was a reminder to everyone present of who held the power and who had the god's ear. Moreover, these gatherings were vital for maintaining alliances and social cohesion. In a society where raiding was as common as farming, ensuring that your neighbor was a friend rather than a foe was crucial. Rituals and festivals provided the perfect backdrop for exchanging gifts, forming alliances, and even arranging marriages, a strategic move to strengthen family ties and secure peace. While the Vikings' religious practices might seem foreign or even brutal to us today, they were deeply rooted in the realities of their world. The rituals were not just about spiritual devotion, but were practical tools for survival and social organization. They were a means of navigating the uncertainties of life, a way to exert some control over the uncontrollable forces of nature and fate. In peeling back the layers of these practices, we find a society that was as much about pragmatism as it was about belief. The Norse understood that the gods' favor was not given freely. It was earned through sacrifice, celebration, and community. It's a testament to the human spirit's relentless quest for meaning and security in a world that offers no guarantees. So, next time you hear tales of Viking feasts or sacrifices, remember that these were more than just colorful stories. They were the lifeblood of a culture, a testament to a people who, despite the odds, found ways to thrive in a world as unpredictable as their own pantheon. And as we dig deeper into their rituals, we continue to uncover the complex tapestry of human history, one that is as much about survival and pragmatism as it is about myth and legend. Stay tuned, because the journey through Norse religious practices is far from over, and there's much more to discover about how these ancient people balanced the scales of life and myth. And speaking of peeling back layers, let's shift our gaze to the enigmatic figures of the Norse spiritual world, seers and shamans. These were the medieval equivalents of that friend who always seems to know what's going to happen next in your favorite TV series. Except, instead of guessing plot twists, they were supposedly predicting the outcomes of battles and the fates of kings. So, who were these seers and shamans, and how did they weave themselves into the very fabric of Norse governance and society? First off, forget the image of a lone figure in a darkened tent gazing into a crystal ball. That's more Hollywood than history. In reality, these mystical individuals, often referred to as Völvers or Seidr practitioners, were deeply integrated into the societal structure. The Völver, a female seer, was a particularly revered figure, wielding influence that could make even the most powerful chieftains pause. But don't let the romanticized notion of a wise old woman fool you. These were complex roles that required a deep understanding of ritual and a strong command over social dynamics. The Völvers were seen as intermediaries between the human and divine, often called upon to perform Seidr, a form of sorcery that involved chanting, trances, and sometimes rather psychedelic experiences. Think of it as the Norse version of a TED talk, where instead of discussing the future of technology, the Völver was laying out the future of the clan. And yes, there was singing involved, though it probably wasn't quite the catchy tune you'd expect on the charts today. Their influence on political decisions was not just significant, it was sometimes pivotal. In societies where the line between the spiritual and the political was as thin as a Viking sword, a Völver's prophecy could sway the course of leadership. According to the saga of Eric the Red, a Völver named Thorbjorg was once invited to predict the future of Greenland's settlements during a particularly harsh winter. Her prophecies weren't just mystical musings. They were strategic insights that leaders used to legitimize their power and guide their decisions. Now, let's talk about the shamans, or as they were sometimes known, the Seidmen. These were generally men who engaged in similar practices to the Völvers, but they often had a tougher time socially. The Norse, despite their progressive pantheon, weren't exactly known for gender equality when it came to mystical practices. Men dabbling in Seidr were sometimes viewed with suspicion, perhaps due to the role's association with femininity, which was seen as contrary to the warrior ethos. This is where the legendary Odin comes back into play, as he himself was said to practice Seidr, making him both a revered god and a bit of a rule-breaker. It's like finding out your macho uncle has a secret passion for knitting. It doesn't quite fit the stereotype, but it makes him all the more intriguing. But how much of this mystical prowess was real, and how much was just clever theatrics? The sagas, while rich in detail, are also prone to embellishment. It's important to remember that these stories were passed down orally before being committed to parchment, which means they were likely polished and exaggerated like a fisherman's tale. The saga of the Younglings gives us accounts of Seidr that could include inducing hallucinations or manipulating perceptions, skills that sound more like ancient stage magic than divine intervention. In terms of economic context, the services of a Völver or a shaman didn't come cheap. Payment often came in the form of food, livestock, or precious goods, which meant employing a seer was an investment, a calculated risk in the volatile economy of the Viking Age. Communities were willing to pay because a favorable prophecy could mean the difference between prosperity and ruin, particularly in a world where the unpredictable forces of nature and warfare dictated the rhythm of life. What's fascinating is the dual role these figures played. They were both respected and feared, celebrated and marginalized. Their existence, much like the stories they told, was a tapestry woven from the threads of power, mystery, and human yearning for control over the uncontrollable. In a society where the guards themselves were prone to whimsy and chaos, having a seer on your side was like having a hotline to divine customer service, though the line might be a bit static-filled. As the sagas and archaeological evidence suggest, the blend of religion and governance in Norse society was as seamless as a Viking ship's hull. The spiritual leaders weren't just advisors, they were integral parts of the political machinery. Their prophecies could legitimize a ruler's claim to power or doom a rival's ambitions. This delicate balance of mystical influence and political pragmatism was a hallmark of the Viking Age, underscoring the complex interplay between belief and power. In the end, while we might question the authenticity of their supernatural abilities, there's no denying the very real impact seers and shamans had on Norse society. They were the conduits of divine will, the voices that echoed the gods' favor or displeasure. Their prophecies and rituals were as much about shaping the future as they were about navigating the present, offering a glimpse into the minds of a people who lived on the edge of the known world. So, as we continue to unravel the mysteries of Norse religious practices, let's keep in mind that these figures were more than just characters in a saga. They were pivotal players in the Viking world, straddling the line between the mortal and the divine. As we leave the seers and shamans to their chants and charms, we'll turn our gaze to other facets of Norse life that reveal how this ancient society thrived amidst the chaos of myth and reality. Stay tuned, because the journey through the Norse world is far from over, and there's plenty more to uncover about how these people walked the tightrope between legend and life. As we leave the seers and shamans to their chants and charms, let's plunge into the Norse concepts of the afterlife, where the stakes were as high as a longship's mast. In the grand tapestry of Viking belief, the afterlife wasn't a one-size-fits-all scenario. Instead, it was a sprawling real estate portfolio with options ranging from the warrior's paradise of Valhalla to the shadowy realm of Hell. These beliefs were more than just ethereal musings. They were powerful motivators that shaped Viking behavior both on and off the battlefield. Let's start with Valhalla, the Viking equivalent of an eternal warrior's brawl, minus the pesky consequences of mortal combat. Picture a vast hall, shimmering with the light of countless shields, where Odin himself welcomed the bravest of the brave. Valhalla was the ultimate badge of honor, reserved for those who fell valiantly in battle. It was a place where warriors would feast, fight, and prepare for Ragnarok, the apocalypse that was less end of the world and more final showdown, complete with a divine cast of characters. But here's the kicker. Valhalla wasn't just about glory. It was about strategic recruitment for Odin's army. Scholars suggest that the allure of Valhalla was as much about incentivizing bravery as it was about spiritual reward. Why else would a warrior charge headlong into a skirmish that promised more axes than a lumberjack convention? The promise of eternal feasting and fighting was an effective carrot, dangled to ensure the Norse gods had a well-stocked army for the end times. Now, let's take a detour to Hell, which wasn't quite the fiery pit of despair one might expect. Named after its ruler, Hell was the underworld destination for those who died from disease or old age. Essentially, any death deemed less than glorious. It was a realm of shadows, more dreary than dreadful, where the souls of the not-so-heroic spent eternity. Hell was a reminder that not all paths led to glory, and that a good death was as important as a good life in Norse society. The psychological impact of these starkly contrasting afterlives was profound. In a world where life was as unpredictable as Loki's next prank, the Norse found comfort in the notion that their deeds in life had cosmic significance. The belief in Valhalla and Hell was a psychological double-edged sword. It pushed warriors to seek glory in battle, while simultaneously instilling a fear of mediocrity. The Vikings were as much about the afterlife's prestige as they were about raiding and trading. Culturally, these beliefs were woven into the Viking fabric like the intricate patterns on a dragon-headed prow. The promise of Valhalla created a society that revered martial prowess and valor, while the specter of Hell underscored the importance of making one's life count. These ideals influenced not just the warriors, but the entire community, shaping social norms and expectations. Stories of heroic deeds were passed down through sagas, reinforcing the cultural value placed on bravery and sacrifice. Economically, the concept of the afterlife also played a role in the distribution of wealth and resources. Burial practices varied according to social status and achievements, with ship burials being the Viking apex of afterlife, real estate. These burials were more than just a nod to the deceased's accomplishments. They were a display of wealth and power, a final flex in a society where status was everything. The Oseberg ship burial, dating back to the early 9th century, is a prime example, where two women were interred with lavish goods, suggesting their high status and the community's investment in honoring their memory. But let's not get too misty-eyed about these romantic notions. The harsh reality was that not everyone could afford a grand exit. Many Vikings were buried in simple graves, with few possessions to accompany them into the afterlife. It's a reminder that, even in death, the Vikings were bound by the practicalities of their world. The afterlife was as much a reflection of societal inequality as it was of spiritual belief. So, how did these beliefs influence Viking behavior in life and in battle? For starters, they fostered a culture of fearlessness. The idea that death in battle was a gateway to eternal glory encouraged warriors to embrace risk with a gusto that would make modern thrill-seekers look tame. This fearless approach was not only advantageous on the battlefield, but also in exploration and trade, where boldness was often rewarded with new lands and alliances. Moreover, these beliefs reinforced the communal bonds essential for survival in the harsh Scandinavian landscape. The shared goal of achieving a glorious afterlife created a collective identity, where individual bravery was celebrated and the community's prosperity was paramount. This sense of unity was vital in a world where alliances could mean the difference between thriving and perishing. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Viking Age was rife with violence, and the glorification of battle had its dark side. The pursuit of honor and reputation often led to feuds and conflicts that could span generations. The sagas are littered with tales of vengeance and blood debts, highlighting the shadow side of a culture that prized martial valor above all else. In the end, the Norse concepts of the afterlife were more than just spiritual musings. They were a framework that shaped every aspect of Viking life. From the battlefield to the burial mound, these beliefs influenced social norms, political dynamics, and cultural values, underscoring the complex interplay between myth and reality. As we continue to explore the Norse world, we'll delve even deeper into the intricate web of beliefs and practices that defined this fascinating society. Stay tuned, because there's much more to uncover about how the Vikings navigated the precarious dance between life, death, and the ever-looming specter of the afterlife. And speaking of the afterlife, let's fast forward to the next chapter in the Norse saga, one that involves a major plot twist, the arrival of Christianity. This isn't your typical religious conversion story, folks. We're about to dive into a cultural mashup that makes a Viking raid look like a peaceful negotiation. The transition from paganism to Christianity in Scandinavia was a complex, multifaceted affair, full of intrigue, compromise, and the occasional splash of blood, but not quite the widespread bloodbath some would have you believe. Let's set the stage with some context. By the late 10th century, the winds of change were blowing across Europe faster than a longship on the open seas. Christianity was on the march, and its missionaries were as relentless as any Viking raider. The Norse weren't just sitting around waiting for conversion, though. They were already deeply entangled in the economic and political currents of Europe, and this played a huge role in the shift. Sure, the Norse loved a good fight, but they loved trade even more. Silk from the East, silver from the Islamic world, and all manner of goods from the European continent were pouring into Norse lands, and along with them came new ideas and beliefs. But let's not oversimplify things. This wasn't a case of one day worshipping Thor and the next day kneeling before a crucifix. The transition was more gradual, a bit like watching a glacier creep across the landscape. Take King Harald Bluetooth of Denmark, for instance. Around 965 AD, he declared his conversion to Christianity, a strategic move likely influenced by his desire to consolidate power and foster alliances with burgeoning Christian states. Harald didn't just wake up one morning with a sudden urge to swap his hammer pendant for a cross. This was political chess, not a religious epiphany. And speaking of Harald, Bluetooth technology might be all about connectivity today, but back then, his decision was about connecting Denmark to the wider Christian world. Now, if you're picturing fiery sermons and mass baptisms at sword point, think again. While there were certainly conflicts, like the conversion of Norway under King Olaf Tryggvason, who reportedly wasn't shy about using a little muscle, most of Scandinavia's shift to Christianity was subtler. It was more a gentle nudge than a forceful shove. Missionaries like Saint Ansgar, who ventured into Viking territory in the 9th century, were more likely to use persuasion than coercion. His efforts in Sweden were as much about building schools and hospitals as they were about baptizing the locals. It's a reminder that sometimes soft power can be as effective as a broadsword. Economically, the appeal of Christianity was undeniable. Aligning with Christian kingdoms opened up new trade routes and diplomatic opportunities. The Church's emphasis on written records and contracts also proved advantageous in a world where oral agreements could be as solid as a puff of smoke. Moreover, the Church provided a powerful central authority that could help maintain peace and order, a tempting offer for leaders tired of constant warfare and feuding. Of course, this transition didn't happen in a vacuum. It was part of a broader European trend, as the continent shifted from a patchwork of pagan tribes to a more unified Christian identity. This was the medieval equivalent of a cultural rebranding, and Scandinavia was just one part of the tapestry. The Norse were savvy enough to recognize that resisting this tide was like trying to stop the sun from rising. It was going to happen whether they liked it or not. But let's not pretend this was a one-way street. The Norse didn't just adopt Christianity wholesale. They put their own spin on it. Instead of completely ditching their old gods, they found ways to blend the new faith with their existing beliefs. This syncretism is evident in the way some Norse Christians continue to commemorate traditional festivals, like Yule, even as they embraced Christian holidays. It was a bit like adding a new chapter to an old saga, rather than starting a new book altogether. And here's a sharp observation. The Norse conversion was less about piety and more about pragmatism. They were practical people, after all. Why dedicate yourself to a god who might not give you a good harvest when you could hedge your bets and pray to a new one for a while? If keeping both Odin and Christ happy meant more bountiful raids, harvests, then so be it. As for the myth of violent religious clashes, it's time to call it out for the exaggeration it often is. Sure, there were skirmishes and a few heads rolled. This was the Viking Age, after all. But most of the Norse didn't need much convincing to see the advantages of Christianity. For many, it was a calculated decision, not a matter of life and death. The real violence was often more political than religious, as rival factions used the new faith to bolster their power. By the time the last Norse holdouts were converted, around the 12th century, the landscape of Scandinavia had changed dramatically. Churches stood where sacred groves once thrived, and the old gods had been relegated to the sagas. Yet, the legacy of Norse paganism didn't vanish overnight. Its echoes can still be heard in the folklore, festivals, and even the language of modern Scandinavia. The days of Thor and Odin might be long gone, but their stories continue to capture imaginations worldwide. Looking back, the Christianization of the Norse world was a testament to the adaptability and resilience of human culture. It was a reminder that religions, like the people who practice them, are not static. They evolve, merge, and transform, reflecting the complexities of the societies they inhabit. And as much as we might romanticize the era of the Viking gods, the transition to Christianity was a significant milestone in the broader narrative of European history, a story of change, compromise, and the enduring human quest for meaning. So, as we wrap up our journey through the religious landscape of the ancient Norse, let's take a moment to appreciate the intricacies of their beliefs and practices. From the thunderous halls of Valhalla to the quiet conversions of Christian monks, the Norse religious experience was as complex as the fjords that framed their world. It was a tale of survival, adaptation, and the relentless march of history, proving that even the mightiest gods are not immune to the winds of change. And there you have it, a saga of gods, heroes, and the human spirit, woven into the fabric of a world that, despite its distance in time, still resonates with us today. In the wild world of 16th century Mughal India, where betrayal was as common as chai on a street corner, a 13-year-old boy named Akbar found himself thrust onto the imperial throne. Talk about an awkward teen phase. It's 1556, and the Mughal Empire is more like a chaotic episode of a medieval soap opera than a stable realm. The nobles are scheming, the borders are restless, and here's young Akbar, suddenly handed the keys to the kingdom after the untimely death of his father, Humayun. Imagine being a kid who barely has a handle on puberty, let alone imperial politics. Now, the empire Akbar inherited was in no way a cushy gig. His father had spent most of his reign fighting to reclaim the throne after being ousted by the Afghan warlord Sher Shah Suri. The Mughal Empire was a patchwork of territories, more fragile than a house of cards in a windstorm. Just days after Akbar's ascension, the empire's capital, Delhi, was threatened by Hemu, a charismatic general of the Suri dynasty, who was eager to finish what Sher Shah had started. Hemu's forces were a looming threat, and the young emperor had to act fast or watch his empire crumble before he even had time to grow a decent mustache. Akbar wasn't alone, though. He had a secret weapon in the form of Behram Khan, his regent and mentor. Think of Khan as the Dumbledore to Akbar's Harry Potter, minus the wand, and with a lot more political cunning. Behram Khan had loyalty in spades and a knack for strategy that would make even the most seasoned general do a double take. He was instrumental in guiding young Akbar through these treacherous waters. The Battle of Panipat in 1556 was the first big test for Akbar and his regent. Facing off against Hemu, who had the audacity to crown himself king, was like pitting a seasoned gladiator against a fledgling knight. But here's the plot twist. Hemu was taken out by a stray arrow to the eye during the battle, a freak accident that turned the tide in favor of Akbar. Some might call it divine intervention, others might just call it dumb luck. Either way, Akbar's forces were emboldened, and the Mughal Empire lived to see another day. With Hemu out of the picture, Behram Khan ensured that Akbar's claim to the throne was solidified. But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't a fairy tale ending where everybody lived happily ever after. The political climate was still a minefield. Nobles were as trustworthy as a fox in a henhouse, and Akbar had to keep his wits about him to maintain control. What's particularly fascinating about Akbar's early reign is how he managed to maneuver through the cutthroat world of Mughal politics. It wasn't just about amassing power. It was about keeping it, and that required a delicate balance of diplomacy, military prowess, and a bit of theatrical flair. Akbar had an uncanny ability to unite disparate factions. He wasn't afraid to incorporate Rajputs, traditional adversaries, into his administration and military. Not exactly a common move for an emperor who had just fought tooth and nail to secure his throne. It was a move that showcased both his political savvy and his vision for a more unified empire. Now, let's bust a myth or two. There's this romantic idea that Akbar was a natural-born prodigy, that he strode into power with a golden touch. In reality, he was more like a sponge, soaking up knowledge and tactics from those around him. He listened, he learned, and he adapted. The truth is, he was fortunate to have advisors like Behram Khan who helped him navigate the early chaos. But give the guy some credit. He knew when to heed advice and when to trust his instincts. Akbar's early years were a whirlwind of battles, diplomacy, and a whole lot of learning on the job. He had to grow up fast, trading childhood for the burdens of leadership. Yet, despite the odds stacked against him, he managed to keep his head, both literally and figuratively. By the time he was a young man, he was already well on his way to becoming one of the most significant rulers in Indian history. Not too shabby for a kid who started his reign amidst a storm of swords and suspicions. So, there you have it. The early years of Akbar the Great, a tale of youthful ambition, strokes of luck, and a whole lot of political chess. It's a reminder that sometimes history's greatest figures start out not as legends, but as kids with a lot to learn and everything to prove. And if you're ever feeling overwhelmed by life's challenges, just remember, at least you're not a teenager trying to hold together an empire while dodging literal and metaphorical arrows. So, as Akbar navigated the minefield of Mughal politics with all the grace of a tap-dancing elephant, he quickly realized that keeping an empire together was a bit like herding cats. You needed strategy, a little bit of luck, and the ability to see beyond the chaos of the moment. Enter Akbar's administrative genius, the unsung hero behind the curtain that turned a patchwork empire into a well-oiled machine. Let's start with Akbar's brainchild, the Mansabdari system. Now, This wasn't just any run-of-the-mill bureaucratic arrangement. This was a revolutionary approach to governance that would make even the most seasoned policymakers of today do a double take. Picture a giant spreadsheet, but instead of Excel, it was written in ink on parchment and involved actual swords and horses. The Mansabdari system was essentially a ranking system for military and civil officials, where ranks, or mansabs, were assigned based on merit rather than just birthright. Shocking, right? In an era when nepotism was practically a family tradition, Akbar's move was akin to launching a medieval LinkedIn, where talent and loyalty were the ultimate endorsements. The brilliance of this system lay in its dual purpose. It allowed Akbar to centralize power while ensuring that officials were directly accountable to the emperor. It was a smart way to keep potential rivals in check, give them just enough power to feel important, but remind them who's really in charge. This meant that the empire wasn't just a collection of feudal lords doing their own thing. It was a cohesive unit with Akbar at the helm, steering it like the captain of a particularly unwieldy ship. Officials were required to provide troops for the imperial army, which meant Akbar could maintain a formidable force without emptying the imperial coffers. Talk about a 2-for-1 deal. But wait, there's more. Akbar didn't stop at restructuring the military. He also shook up the economic system with his innovative revenue system, the brainchild of his brilliant finance minister, Tadar Mal. Think of Tadar Mal as the Bill Gates of Mughal economics, visionary, meticulous, and just a tad obsessed with numbers. This revenue system, known as the Zapt system, involved meticulously surveying and documenting land to assess taxes based on the land's productivity. It was a system that demanded precision, like trying to hit a bullseye while balancing on a tightrope. Here's the kicker. This wasn't just about squeezing peasants dry like a proverbial lemon. Akbar's policy was surprisingly progressive for its time. By standardizing tax collection and ensuring it was based on actual land productivity, the system reduced the burden on farmers and prevented corrupt officials from pocketing the difference. It was a win-win, a rare commodity in the annals of history. This focus on fairness and efficiency not only increased the empire's revenues, but also fostered a more stable economy, encouraging agricultural innovation and productivity. And let's not forget Akbar's knack for talent acquisition. The guy had an eye for sparring potential, regardless of religious or ethnic background, a policy that was about as common as a snowstorm in the Sahara. Akbar was like a medieval headhunter, gathering the best and brightest minds of his time. His court was a veritable United Nations of brilliance, featuring Hindus, Muslims, Persians, and even a few Jesuits thrown in for good measure. This diversity wasn't just window dressing. It was the engine driving the empire's cultural and intellectual renaissance. Take the example of Raja Birbal, one of Akbar's most trusted advisors and a Hindu poet who was as sharp with words as he was with statecraft. Or Abul Fazl, the mastermind behind the Ainai Akbari, the magnum opus that documented the empire's administration and culture in meticulous detail. These were men who would have been sidelined in any other court, but under Akbar, they flourished like wildflowers in a spring meadow. The economic impacts of these policies were nothing short of transformative. By creating an environment where talent could thrive and commerce could flourish, Akbar's empire became a hub of trade and innovation. The empire's GDP soared, and cities like Agra and Fadepur Sikri became bustling centers of commerce and culture. Merchants from as far as Europe were lured by the promise of prosperity, bringing with them new ideas and technologies. It was globalization before the term even existed. But let's not get too carried away by the romanticized vision of Akbar as a benevolent autocrat. The reality was a bit more complex. While his policies were progressive, they were also deeply pragmatic, designed to consolidate his power and ensure the longevity of his reign. Akbar wasn't just playing a game of chess. He was playing three-dimensional chess, constantly adapting to the shifting dynamics of his empire. And here's a fun fact. Akbar's penchant for innovation extended even to his personal life. He was a fan of unconventional experiments and wasn't afraid to test the limits of human behavior. He once conducted an experiment to determine the natural language of humans by raising infants in silence. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. But this curiosity-driven approach was emblematic of his reign, always questioning, always seeking new ways to understand and improve his empire. So there you have it, a glimpse into the administrative genius of Akbar the Great, a ruler who transformed an empire not through brute force, but through wit, innovation, and a willingness to embrace the new and unfamiliar. His legacy is a testament to the power of vision and the impact of effective governance. And as the story of Akbar's reign unfolds, one thing becomes clear. History's greatest leaders aren't just born, they're forged in the crucible of challenge and change. Stay tuned, because Akbar's story is far from over, and there are plenty more twists and turns in the tale of this remarkable emperor. As Akbar's administrative brilliance laid the foundation for a sprawling empire, he turned his gaze towards social and religious reforms with the enthusiasm of someone who just discovered yoga and now wants everyone to try it. The emperor wasn't just content with a unified empire on paper. He wanted unity in spirit, too. And that's where things get interesting, borderline eccentric, but undeniably fascinating. Let's start with Akbar's bold move to abolish the jizya tax in 1564. For those not fluent in medieval fiscal policies, jizya was a tax levied on non-Muslims, essentially a follow my religion or pay up fee. Akbar saw this tax as a barrier to harmony in his kingdom, a bit like trying to host a potluck where only certain guests are charged an entry fee. By scrapping the jizya, Akbar was making a statement. His empire wasn't just a Muslim club with a few honorary members. It was a place where different faiths could coexist without one feeling like it was footing the bill for the party. Now, this didn't mean everyone suddenly sang Cumbare around a campfire, but it was a step toward a more inclusive society. But wait, Akbar didn't stop there. He was determined to foster interfaith dialogue, so he rolled out the metaphorical red carpet for religious scholars at the Ibadat Khana, his very own house of worship. Built in 1575 in Fayda-pur Sikri, this was the Mughal Empire's version of a TED talk stage, minus the clickers and PowerPoint slides. Scholars from Islam, Hinduism, Jainism, Zoroastrianism, and even Christianity were invited to debate theology, philosophy, and probably the best methods for brewing chai. Picture a medieval version of Crossfire, complete with robes and a lot more incense. Now, if you think this was a recipe for constructive dialogue, you might want to adjust those rose-tinted glasses. The debates often descended into arguments more heated than a summer in Rajasthan. Scholars bickered, egos flared, and Akbar watched it all unfold like a reality TV show producer anticipating the next dramatic twist. Yet, despite the chaos, these debates were groundbreaking. They underscored Akbar's commitment to religious pluralism, even if the execution was as turbulent as a monsoon storm. Then there was Akbar's piece de resistance, Din-i-Ilahi, or the religion of God. If you thought starting a new religion was an easy task, Akbar would like a word. In 1582, he concocted this blend of the best elements from various faiths, kind of like a spiritual smoothie. The goal, to create unity among his subjects. The reality, it was more confusing than a Rubik's Cube in the dark. Din-i-Ilahi was a mishmash of Islamic, Hindu, Christian, Jain, and Zoroastrian beliefs, with a dash of Akbar's own philosophy thrown in for good measure. The problem, it turned out that people were quite attached to their existing faiths, a minor oversight when launching a religion. Din-i-Ilahi had about as much staying power as a New Year's diet plan, attracting only a handful of followers, many of whom were likely just trying to stay on the emperor's good side. Among its noble converts was Birbal, Akbar's witty advisor, whose loyalty knew no bounds. The religion fizzled out faster than you can say divine intervention, leaving historians to chuckle at Akbar's ambitious, if misguided, attempt to play deity. But let's not dismiss Akbar's efforts as mere folly. His attempts at religious reform, although not entirely successful, were revolutionary for their time. In an era where religious intolerance was often the norm, Akbar's vision of a harmonious society was as radical as it was idealistic. He laid the groundwork for a legacy of tolerance, even if he didn't quite nail the execution. And while Din-i-Ilahi might have ended up as a footnote in history, Akbar's broader policies had lasting impacts. His abolishment of the jizya and encouragement of interfaith dialogue sowed seeds of coexistence that would influence future rulers. Akbar's reign became synonymous with an era of relative peace and prosperity, where different cultures and ideas could mingle and flourish. Now, let's sprinkle in some economic context because, let's face it, even the loftiest ideals are often grounded in cold, hard cash. Akbar's religious policies weren't just about warm and fuzzy feelings. They were pragmatic too. By fostering religious harmony, he created a stable environment conducive to trade and agriculture. Prosperity followed, attracting merchants and artisans like bees to honey. The empire's coffers swelled, and Akbar's reputation as a just and benevolent ruler was cemented. But let's not get too misty-eyed. Akbar was still a shrewd politician at heart. His reforms were as much about consolidating power as they were about promoting peace. A unified empire was a strong empire, and a strong empire meant fewer rebellious nobles to worry about. Akbar's policies were a masterclass in balancing idealism with practicality, a juggling act worthy of a Cirque du Soleil performance. So, as we close the curtain on this chapter of Akbar's reign, remember, the emperor wasn't just a dreamer, he was a doer. His social and religious policies, though imperfect, were a testament to his vision and determination. Akbar dared to imagine a world where differences could be celebrated rather than condemned, a vision that, while not fully realized in his lifetime, continues to inspire. And as we continue to explore the life and times of Akbar the Great, keep in mind that this story is far from over. We've seen the emperor's administrative prowess and his ambitious social reforms, but there's more to uncover. So stay tuned, because the saga of Akbar's reign is a tapestry of triumphs, challenges, and the enduring quest for unity in a diverse world. In the grand tapestry of Akbar's reign, we've seen the emperor juggle politics and religion with the finesse of a circus performer balancing on a high wire. But wait, there's more to this Mughal maestro than just administrative acrobatics and spiritual smoothies. The man had an eye for culture, and he wasn't afraid to use it. Akbar's patronage of the arts and architecture was as lavish as a Bollywood wedding, and just as colourful. Let's kick things off with Akbar's love affair with architecture, which was as intense as a summer romance. The crown jewel of his architectural endeavours, Faidehpur Sikri, a city that was supposed to be his magnum opus. Imagine the ambition, an entire city built from scratch, a testament to the emperor's vision and grandeur. If you're picturing a 16th century version of The Sims, you're not far off. Akbar wasn't just building a city, he was crafting an imperial utopia, a place to showcase the cultural zenith of his reign. Founded in 1571, Faidehpur Sikri was built on a rocky ridge, with red sandstone palaces, grand mosques, and lush gardens. It was the Mughal Empire's answer to a Pinterest board, each building meticulously designed to reflect the emperor's eclectic tastes. The city spanned 40 kilometers and took nearly 15 years to complete, a blink of an eye in the timeline of history, but a marathon in terms of construction. Picture this, the Buland Darwaza, or Gate of Magnificence, standing 54 meters tall, welcoming visitors with an imposing grandeur that screamed, "Welcome to the empire of Akbar the Great." Then there's the Diwan-i-Khas, the hall of private audience, where Akbar would meet with his advisors and possibly ponder the mysteries of the universe, or just what was for lunch. The architectural style of these structures was a fusion of Persian, Indian, and Islamic influences, a stone-cold declaration of Akbar's inclusive vision. But here's where the plot twists like a Bollywood drama. Faidehpur Sikri, this shimmering jewel of Mughal architecture, was abandoned just 14 years after its completion. Why? Well, it turns out that building a city without a reliable water source is like buying a sports car without checking if it has an engine. The site's chronic water scarcity was more than just an inconvenience. It was a deal-breaker. Akbar's grand vision was undermined by a simple yet crucial oversight, the necessity of H2O. Cue the myth-busting. While it's tempting to romanticize Faidehpur Sikri as a victim of environmental oversight, let's not forget the political context. Akbar was a ruler who needed to be where the action was, and Faidehpur Sikri's remote location didn't exactly scream convenient. When the emperor's attention shifted to the more strategically located Lahore, the fate of Faidehpur Sikri was sealed. It was a classic case of great idea, poor execution, a reminder that even the grandest visions can crumble under the weight of practical realities. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Despite being abandoned, Faidehpur Sikri remains a UNESCO World Heritage Site. a testament to Akbar's architectural audacity. It stands as a symbol of the emperor's ambition and artistic flair, drawing tourists and historians alike who marvel at its beauty and lament its downfall. Now, on to the arts, where Akbar's influence was as pervasive as the Mughal Empire itself. The man had a knack for surrounding himself with talent, and his court became a beacon for artists, musicians, and poets. It's like he was running the world's most exclusive arts festival, except instead of wristbands, participants got courtly titles. Akbar's atelier was a melting pot of artistic genius. The emperor's interest in painting led to the development of the Mughal school of painting, a style characterized by its vibrant colors, intricate details, and a penchant for realism. These miniatures, often depicting courtly life or epic tales, were like the Instagram stories of their day, capturing the essence of Mughal life in exquisite detail. Artists like Daswent and Basawan flourished under Akbar's patronage, producing works that would leave an indelible mark on Indian art. And let's not forget music, the language of the soul. Akbar's court was a veritable jukebox of musical talent, with the legendary Tansen at its helm. Tansen's compositions were said to have the power to bring rain, light lamps, and soothe even the most troubled minds. Now, while these claims might be a tad exaggerated, let's face it, we're talking about music, not magic. They do underscore the cultural renaissance that Akbar fostered. But here's the kicker. Akbar's cultural policies weren't just about filling his palace with pretty things and soothing sounds. They were a strategic tool to unify his diverse empire. By promoting a shared cultural identity, Akbar was playing a masterful game of social chess, using art and music to bridge divides and foster unity. It was a subtle, yet powerful form of diplomacy, reinforcing his vision of an inclusive empire. So, as we delve into Akbar's cultural legacy, remember that it wasn't just about the art or the architecture. It was about the message they conveyed, a message of unity, diversity, and the power of human creativity. Akbar's reign was a symphony of cultures, a reminder that the arts are not just a reflection of society, but a catalyst for change. And as we continue to unravel the story of Akbar the Great, keep in mind that there's more to this tale than meets the eye. We've explored his administrative genius, his social and religious reforms, and now his cultural contributions. But the saga is far from over. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises even more intrigue, challenges, and the enduring legacy of one of history's most fascinating emperors. As we sail into the sunset of Akbar's storied reign, let's shift our focus to the legacy of this larger-than-life emperor, one who's been painted with the broad strokes of legend and the fine lines of reality. Akbar's reign was nothing short of a roller coaster through the annals of history, a ride filled with dizzying highs and a few stomach-churning drops. But how much of his legacy is fact, and how much is the result of some top-tier Mughal PR? Let's dig in. First, let's give the man his due. Akbar wasn't just a ruler, he was a game-changer. The groundwork he laid transformed the Mughal Empire into a powerhouse, setting the stage for what many historians call the Golden Age under his grandson, Shah Jahan. You know, the guy who built the Taj Mahal, a feat that still makes architects' jaws drop and romantics swoon. Akbar's policies on administration, economics, and culture were like the secret sauce that gave the Mughal Empire its distinctive flavor. His empire stretched over 2 million square kilometers at its zenith, a territory so vast it would make even the most seasoned conqueror do a double take. But let's not pretend Akbar's reign was all sunshine and daisies. This was a time when political intrigue was as common as mangoes in summer, and Akbar had his share of missteps. For instance, his attempts to create a new religion, Din-i-Ilahi, were more of a swing and a miss than a home run. It was an ambitious experiment that fizzled out faster than you can say interfaith harmony. And while his empire was a melting pot of cultures, let's not gloss over the fact that this unity was held together by a combination of diplomacy and, when necessary, good old-fashioned military might. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. The tales of Akbar, the legendary warrior, the philosopher king, the benevolent ruler. How much of this is true, and how much is just the stuff of epic ballads? Akbar's court chronicler, Abul Fazl, penned the Akbarnama, an account of Akbar's life and reign that reads more like an imperial highlight reel than an objective biography. It's like if your Instagram feed only showed your best moments, conveniently skipping over the times you tripped in public or forgot to respond to emails. Sure, Akbar was an astute leader, but he also had the benefit of a carefully curated image. His portrayal as a wise, just, and almost saintly figure was as much a product of savvy storytelling as it was of his policies. The Akbarnama is filled with tales of Akbar's superhuman feats, like single-handedly taming wild elephants and dispensing justice with a fairness that would give Salaman a run for his money. But let's be real. These stories serve the dual purpose of glorifying Akbar and reinforcing his authority. After all, nothing says, "Don't mess with me," like having your own Chronicles of Narnia. Yet, even if we peel back the layers of myth, Akbar's achievements remain impressive. His revenue system, the Mansabdari, and his embrace of cultural diversity were innovative for their time, creating a stable and prosperous empire. His policies encouraged trade and agriculture, swelling the empire's coffers with the kind of wealth that made other rulers green with envy. By standardizing weights and measures and building roads and ports, Akbar turned his empire into a commercial juggernaut, attracting merchants from as far away as Europe. This wasn't just an empire. It was the world's biggest bazaar, a place where ideas and goods flowed freely. But what about modern India? How does this kaleidoscope of a country view Akbar today? Well, in a nation that boasts over 1 billion people and dozens of languages, opinions about Akbar are as varied as the spices in a masala blend. To many, he's still revered as a visionary ruler who preached tolerance and unity, values that resonate deeply in today's multicultural society. His story is taught in schools, his legacy celebrated in films and television, where he's often portrayed as the wise and benevolent ruler of law. However, not everyone buys into the saintly image. Some see him as a conqueror whose policies, while progressive, were ultimately aimed at consolidating power. Critics argue that his empire was held together by force as much as by diplomacy. In a country where history is often viewed through the lens of current politics, Akbar's legacy can be as divisive as it is unifying. So, where does this leave us? Akbar's legacy is a tapestry woven with both myth and reality, a blend of genius and ambition, marred by the occasional misstep. He was a ruler who dared to dream big and act even bigger, leaving behind a legacy that continues to spark debate and inspire awe. Whether seen as a hero or a shrewd politician, Akbar's story is a testament to the complexities of leadership and the enduring power of vision. As we wrap up this journey through the life and times of Akbar the Great, let's remember that history is rarely black and white. It's a spectrum of shades, colored by the perspectives of those who lived it and those who tell it. Akbar's story is one of those rare tales that transcends time, offering lessons in leadership, tolerance, and the pursuit of greatness. So, the next time you find yourself pondering the intricacies of power and legacy, just remember, if a teenage emperor could turn a fractured empire into a thriving civilization, maybe, just maybe, there's hope for the rest of us yet.